Note by the late Mr. Allan Quatermain. My friend, into whose hands I hope that all these manuscripts of mine will pass one day, of this one I have something to say to you. A long while ago I jotted down in it the history of the events that it details with more or less completeness. This I did for my own satisfaction. You will have noted how memory fails us as we advance in years. We recollect, with an almost painful exactitude, what we experienced and saw in our youth, but the happenings of our middle life slip away from us or become blurred, like a stretch of low-lying landscape overflowed by grey and nebulous mist. Far off the sun still seems to shine upon the plains and hills of adolescence and early manhood, as yet it shines about us in the fleeting hours of our age, that ground on which we stand today, but the valley between is filled with fog. Yes, even its prominences, which symbolize the more startling events of that past, often are lost in this confusing fog. It was an appreciation of these truths which led me to set down the following details, though of course much is omitted, of my brief intercourse with the strange and splendid creature whom I knew under the names of Ayesha, or Haya, or She Who Commands, not indeed with any view to their publication, but before I forgot them that, if I wished to do so, I might reperuse them in the evening of old age to which I hope to attain. Indeed, at the time the last thing I intended was that they should be given to the world even after my own death, because they, or many of them, are so unusual that I feared lest they should cause smiles and in a way cast a slur upon my memory and truthfulness. Also, as you will read, as to this matter I made a promise and I have always tried to keep my promises and to guard the secrets of others. For these reasons I proposed, in case I neglected or forgot to destroy them myself, to leave a direction that this should be done by my executors. Further, I have been careful to make no allusion whatever to them either in casual conversation or in anything else that I may have written, my desire being that this page of my life should be kept quite private, something known only to myself. Therefore, too, I never so much as hinted of them to anyone, not even to yourself to whom I have told so much. Well, I recorded the main facts concerning this expedition and its issues, simply and with as much exactness as I could, and laid them aside. I do not say that I never thought of them again, since amongst them were some which, together with the problems they suggested, proved to be of an unforgettable nature. Also, whenever any of Ayesha's sayings or stories which are not preserved in these pages came back to me, as has happened from time to time, I jotted them down and put them away with this manuscript. Thus among these notes you will find a history of the city of Kor as she told it to me, which I have omitted here. Still, many of these remarkable events did more or less fade from my mind, as the image does from an unfixed photograph, till only their outlines remained, faint if distinguishable. To tell the truth, I was rather ashamed of the whole story in which I cut so poor a figure. On reflection it was obvious to me, although honesty had compelled me to set out all that is essential exactly as it occurred, adding nothing and taking nothing away, that I had been the victim of very gross deceit. This strange woman, whom I had met in the ruins of a place called Kor, without any doubt had thrown a glamour over my senses and at the moment almost caused me to believe much that is quite unbelievable. For instance, she had told me ridiculous stories as to interviews between herself and certain heathen goddesses, though it is true that, almost with her next breath, these she qualified or contradicted. Also, she had suggested that her life had been prolonged far beyond our mortal span, for hundreds and hundreds of years, indeed, which, as Euclid says, is absurd, and had pretended to supernatural powers, which is still more absurd. Moreover, by a clever use of some hypnotic or mesmeric power, she had feigned to transport me to some place beyond the earth and in the halls of Hades to show me what is veiled from the eyes of man, and not only me, but the savage warrior Umslopogaas, commonly called Umslopogaas of the Axe, who, with Hans, a Hottentot, was my companion upon that adventure. There were like things equally incredible, such as her appearance, when all seemed lost, in the battle with the troll-like Rezu. To omit these, the sum of it was that I had been shamefully duped, and if anyone finds himself in that position, as most people have at one time or another in their lives, wisdom suggests that he had better keep the circumstances to himself. Well, so the matter stood, or rather lay in the recesses of my mind and in the cupboard where I hide my papers, when one evening someone, as a matter of fact it was Captain Good, an individual of romantic tendencies who is fond, sometimes I think too fond, of fiction, brought a book to this house which he insisted over and over again really I must peruse. Ascertaining that it was a novel I declined, for to tell the truth I am not fond of romance in any shape, being a person who has found the hard facts of life of sufficient interest as they stand. Reading I admit I like, but in this matter, as in everything else, my range is limited. I study the Bible, especially the Old Testament, both because of its sacred lessons and of the majesty of the language of its inspired translators, whereof that of Ayesha, which I render so poorly from her flowing and melodious Arabic, reminded me. For poetry I turn to Shakespeare, and, at the other end of the scale, to the Ingoldsby legends, many of which I know almost by heart, while for current affairs I content myself with the newspapers. For the rest I peruse anything to do with ancient Egypt that I happen to come across, because this land and its history have a queer fascination for me, that perhaps has its roots in occurrences or dreams of which this is not the place to speak. Lastly, now and again I read one of the Latin or Greek authors in a translation, since I regret to say that my lack of education does not enable me to do so in the original. But for modern fiction I have no taste, although from time to time I sample it in a railway train and occasionally am amused by such excursions into the poetic and unreal. So it came about that the more good bothered me to read this particular romance, the more I determined that I would do nothing of the sort. Being a persistent person, however, when he went away about 10 o'clock at night, he deposited it by my side, under my nose indeed, so that it might not be overlooked. Thus it came about that I could not help seeing some Egyptian hieroglyphics in an oval on the cover, also the title, and underneath it your own name, my friend, all of which excited my curiosity, especially the title, which was brief and enigmatic, consisting indeed of one word, she. I took up the work and on opening it the first thing my eye fell upon was a picture of a veiled woman, the sight of which made my heart stand still, so painfully did it remind me of a certain veiled woman whom once it had been my fortune to meet. Glancing from it to the printed page one word seemed to leap at me. It was Kaur. Now of veiled women there are plenty in the world, but were there also two Kaurs? Then I turned to the beginning and began to read. This happened in the autumn when the sun does not rise till about 6, but it was broad daylight before I ceased from reading, or rather rushing through that book. Oh! What was I to make of it? For here in its pages, to say nothing of old Bill Ali, who, by the way lied, probably to order, when he told Mr. Holly that no white man had visited his country for many generations, and those gloomy, man-eating Amahagger scoundrels, once again I found myself face to face with she who commands, now rendered as she who must be obeyed, which means much the same thing in her case at least, yes, with Ayesha the lovely, the mystic, the changeful and the imperious. Moreover, the history filled up many gaps in my own limited experiences of that enigmatical being who was half divine, though, I think, rather wicked or at any rate unmoral in her way, and yet all woman. It is true that it showed her in lights very different from and higher than those in which she had presented herself to me. Yet the substratum of her character was the same, or rather of her characters, for of these she seemed to have several in a single body, being, as she said of herself to me, not one but many and not here but everywhere. Further, I found the story of Callicrates, which I had set down as a mere falsehood invented for my bewilderment, expanded and explained. Or rather not explained, since, perhaps that she might deceive, to me she had spoken of this murdered Callicrates without enthusiasm, as a handsome person to whom, because of an indiscretion of her youth, she was bound by destiny and whose return, somewhat to her sorrow, she must wait. At least she did so at first, though in the end when she bared her heart at the moment of our farewell, she vowed she loved him only and was appointed to him by a divine decree. Also I found other things of which I knew nothing, such as the fire of life with its fatal gift of indefinite existence, although I remember that like the giant Rezu whom Umslopogaas defeated, she did talk of a cup of life of which she had drunk, that might have been offered to my lips, had I been politic, bowed the knee and shown more faith in her and her supernatural pretensions. Lastly, I saw the story of her end, and as I read it I wept. Yes, I confess I wept, although I feel sure that she will return again. Now I understood why she had quailed and even seemed to shrivel when, in my last interview with her, stung beyond endurance by her witcheries and sarcasms, I had suggested that even for her with all her powers, fate might reserve one of its shrewdest blows. Some prescience had told her that if the words seemed random, truth spoke through my lips, although, and this was the worst of it, she did not know what weapon would deal the stroke or when and where it was doomed to fall. I was amazed, I was overcome, but as I closed that book I made up my mind, first that I would continue to preserve absolute silence as to Ayesha and my dealings with her, as, during my life, I was bound by oath to do, and secondly that I would not cause my manuscript to be destroyed. I did not feel that I had any right to do so in view of what already had been published to the world. There let it lie to appear one day, or not to appear, as might be fated. Meanwhile my lips were sealed. I would give Good back his book without comment and buy another copy. One more word. It is clear that I did not touch more than the fringe of the real Ayesha. In 1,000 ways she bewitched and deceived me so that I never plumbed her nature's depths. Perhaps this was my own fault because from the first I showed a lack of faith in her and she wished to pay me back in her own fashion, or perhaps she had other private reasons for her secrecy. Certainly the character she discovered to me differed in many ways from that which she revealed to Mr. Holly and to Leo Vinci, or Callicrates, whom, it seems, once she slew in her jealousy and rage. She told me as much as she thought it fit that I should know, and no more. Allan Quatermain. The Grange, Yorkshire. The Talisman. I believe it was the old Egyptians, a very wise people, probably indeed much wiser than we know, for in the leisure of their ample centuries they had time to think out things, who declared that each individual personality is made up of 6 or 7 different elements, although the Bible only allows us 3, namely, body, soul, and spirit. The body that the man or woman wore, if I understand their theory aright, which perhaps I, an ignorant person, do not, was but a kind of sack or fleshly covering containing these different principles. Or mayhap it did not contain them all, but was simply a house as it were, in which they lived from time to time and seldom all together, although one or more of them was present continually, as though to keep the place warmed and aired. This is but a casual illustrative suggestion, for what right have I, Allan Quatermain, out of my little reading and probably erroneous deductions, to form any judgment as to the theories of the old Egyptians? Still these, as I understand them, suffice to furnish me with the text that man is not one, but many, in which connection it may be remembered that often in Scripture he is spoken of as being the home of many demons. 7, I think. Also, to come to another far-off example, the Zulus talk of their witch doctors as being inhabited by a multitude of spirits. Anyhow, of one thing I am quite sure, we are not always the same. Different personalities actuate us at different times. In one our passion of this sort or the other is our Lord, in another we are reason itself. In one hour we follow the basest appetites, in another we hate them and the spirit arising through our mortal murk shines within or above us like a star. In one hour our desire is to kill and spare not, in another we are filled with the holiest compassion even towards an insect or a snake, and are ready to forgive like a god. Everything rules us in turn, to such an extent indeed, that sometimes one begins to wonder whether we really rule anything. Now the reason of all this homily is that I, Allan, the most practical and unimaginative of persons, just a homely, half-educated hunter and trader who chances to have seen a good deal of the particular little world in which his lot was cast, at one period of my life became the victim of spiritual longings. I am a man who has suffered great bereavements in my time, such as have seared my soul, since, perhaps because of my rather primitive and simple nature, my affections are very strong. By day or night I can never forget those whom I have loved and whom I believe to have loved me. For you know, in our vanity some of us are apt to hold that certain people with whom we have been intimate upon the earth, really did care for us and, in our still greater vanity, or should it be called madness, to imagine that they still care for us after they have left the earth and entered on some new state of society and surroundings which, if they exist, inferentially are much more congenial than any they can have experienced here. At times, however, cold doubts strike us as to this matter, of which we long to know the truth. Also behind looms a still blacker doubt, namely whether they live at all. For some years of my lonely existence these problems haunted me day by day, till at length I desired above everything on earth to lay them at rest in one way or another. Once, at Durban, I met a man who was a spiritualist to whom I confided a little of my perplexities. He laughed at me and said that they could be settled with the greatest ease. All I had to do was to visit a certain local medium who for a fee of 1 guinea would tell me everything I wanted to know. Although I rather grudged the guinea, being more than usually hard up at the time, I called upon this person, but over the results of that visit, or rather the lack of them, I draw a veil. My queer and perhaps unwholesome longing, however, remained with me and would not be abated. I consulted a clergyman of my acquaintance, a good and spiritually minded man, but he could only shrug his shoulders and refer me to the Bible, saying, quite rightly I doubt not, that with what it reveals I ought to be contented. Then I read certain mystical books which were recommended to me. These were full of fine words, undiscoverable in a pocket dictionary, but really took me no forwarder, since in them I found nothing that I could not have invented myself, although while I was actually studying them, they seemed to convince me. I even tackled Swedenborg, or rather samples of him, for he is very copious, but without satisfactory results. Ha, JB. Then I gave up the business. Some months later I was in Zululand and being near the Black Kloof where he dwelt, I paid a visit to my acquaintance of whom I have written elsewhere, the wonderful and ancient dwarf, Zikali, known as the thing that should never have been born, also more universally among the Zulus as opener of roads. When we had talked of many things connected with the state of Zululand and its politics, I rose to leave for my wagon, since I never cared for sleeping in the Black Kloof if it could be avoided. Is there nothing else that you want to ask me, Macumazahn? Asked the old dwarf, tossing back his long hair and looking at I had almost written through me. I shook my head. That is strange, Macumazahn, for I seem to see something written on your mind, something to do with spirits. Then I remembered all the problems that had been troubling me, although in truth I had never thought of propounding them to Zikali. Ah! It comes back, does it? He exclaimed, reading my thought. Out with it, then, Macumazahn, while I am in a mood to answer, and before I grow tired, for you are an old friend of mine and will so remain till the end, many years hence, and if I can serve you, I will. I filled my pipe and sat down again upon the stool of carved redwood which had been brought for me. You are named Opener of Roads, are you not, Zikali? I said. Yes, the Zulus have always called me that, since before the days of Choka. But what of names, which often enough mean nothing at all? Only that I want to open a road, Zikali, that which runs across the river of death. Aho! He laughed, it is very easy, and snatching up a little assegai that lay beside him, he proffered it to me, adding, be brave now and fall on that. Then before I have counted 60 the road will be wide open, but whether you will see anything on it I cannot tell you. Again I shook my head and answered. It is against our law. Also while I still live I desire to know whether I shall meet certain others on that road after my time has come to cross the river. Perhaps you who deal with spirits, can prove the matter to me, which no one else seems able to do. Aho! Laughed Zikali again. What do my ears hear? Am I, the poor Zulu cheat, as you will remember once you called me, Macumazahn, asked to show that which is hidden from all the wisdom of the great white people? The question is, I answered with irritation, not what you are asked to do, but what you can do. That I do not know yet, Macumazahn. Whose spirits do you desire to see? If that of a woman called Mamina is one of them, I think that perhaps I whom she loved, one. She is not one of them, Zikali. Moreover, if she loved you, you paid back her love with death. which perhaps was the kindest thing I could do, Macumazahn, for reasons that you may be able to guess, and others with which I will not trouble you. But if not hers, whose? Let me look, let me look. Why, there seems to be 2 of them, headwives, I mean, and I thought that white men only took 1 wife. Also a multitude of others, their faces float up in the water of your mind. An old man with grey hair, little children, perhaps they were brothers and sisters, and some who may be friends. Also very clear indeed that Mamina whom you do not wish to see. Well, Macumazahn, this is unfortunate, since she is the only one whom I can show you, or rather put you in the way of finding. Unless indeed there are other Kaffir women. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, Macumazahn, that only Blackfeet travel on the road which I can open, over those in which run white blood I have no power. Then it is finished, I said, rising again and taking a step or 2 towards the gate. Come back and sit down, Macumazahn. I did not say so. Am I the only ruler of magic in Africa, which I am told is a big country? I came back and sat down, for my curiosity, a great failing with me, was excited. Thank you, Zikali, I said, but I will have no dealings with more of your witch doctors. No, no, because you are afraid of them, quite without reason, Macumazahn, seeing that they are all cheats except myself. I am the last child of wisdom, the rest are stuffed with lies, as Chukka found out when he killed every one of them whom he could catch. But perhaps there might be a white doctor who would have rule over white spirits. If you mean missionaries, I began hastily. No, Macumazahn, I do not mean your praying men who are cast in one mold and measured with one rule, and say what they are taught to say, not thinking for themselves. Some of them think, Zikali. Yes, and then the others fall on them with big sticks. The real priest is he to whom the spirit comes, not he who feeds upon its wrappings, and speaks through a mask carved by his father's fathers. I am a priest like that, which is why all my fellowship have hated me. If so, you have paid back their hate, Zikali, but cease to cast round the lion like a timid hound, and tell me what you mean. Of whom do you speak? That is the trouble, Macumazahn. I do not know. This lion, or rather lioness, lies hid in the caves of a very distant mountain and I have never seen her, in the flesh. Then how can you talk of what you have never seen? In the same way, Macumazahn, that your priests talk of what they have never seen, because they, or a few of them, have knowledge of it. I will tell you a secret. All seers who live at the same time, if they are great, commune with each other because they are kin and their spirits meet in sleep or dreams. Therefore I know of a mistress of our craft, a very lioness among jackals, who for thousands of years has lain sleeping in the northern caves and, humble though I am, she knows of me. Quite so, I said, yawning, but perhaps, Zikali, you will come to the point of the spear. What of her? How is she named, and if she exists will she help me? I will answer your question backwards, Macumazahn. I think that she will help you if you help her, in what way I do not know, because although witch doctors sometimes work without pay, as I am doing now, Macumazahn, witch doctoresses never do. As for her name, the only one that she has among our company is Queen, because she is the first of all of them and the most beauteous among women. For the rest I can tell you nothing, except that she has always been and I suppose, in this shape or in that, will always be while the world lasts, because she has found the secret of life unending. You mean that she is immortal, Zikali, I answered with a smile. I do not say that, Macumazahn, because my little mind cannot shape the thought of immortality. But when I was a babe, which is far ago, she had lived so long that scarce would she know the difference between then and now, and already in her breast was all wisdom gathered. I know it, because although, as I have said, we have never seen each other, at times we walk together in our sleep, for thus she shares her loneliness, and I think, though this may be but a dream, that last night she told me to send you on to her to seek an answer to certain questions which you would put to me today. Also to me she seemed to desire that you should do her a service, I know not what service. Now I grew angry and asked, "Why does it please you to fool me, Zikali, with such talk as this? If there is any truth in it, show me where the woman called Queen lives and how I am to come to her." The old wizard took up the little assegai which he had offered to me and with its blade raked out ashes from the fire that always burnt in front of him. While he did so, he talked to me, as I thought in a random fashion, perhaps to distract my attention, of a certain white man whom he said I should meet upon my journey and of his affairs, also of other matters, none of which interested me much at the time. These ashes he patted down flat and then on them drew a map with the point of his spear, making grooves for streams, certain marks for bush and forest, wavy lines for water and swamps and little heaps for hills. When he had finished it all he bade me come round the fire and study the picture across which by an afterthought he drew a wandering furrow with the edge of the assegai to represent a river, and gathered the ashes in a lump at the northern end to signify a large mountain. "Look at it well, Macumazahn," he said, "and forget nothing, since if you make this journey and forget, you die. Nay, no need to copy it in that book of yours, for see, I will stamp it on your mind." Then suddenly he gathered up the warm ashes in a double handful and threw them into my face, muttering something as he did so and adding aloud, "There, now you will remember." "Certainly I shall," I answered, coughing, "and I beg that you will not play such a joke upon me again." As a matter of fact, whatever may have been the reason, I never forgot any detail of that extremely intricate map. "That big river must be the Zambezi," I stuttered, "and even then the mountain of your queen, if it be her mountain, is far away, and how can I come there alone?" "I don't know, Macumazahn, though perhaps you might do so in company. At least I believe that in the old days people used to travel to the place, since I have heard a great city stood there once which was the heart of a mighty empire." Now I pricked up my ears, for though I believed nothing of Zikali's story of a wonderful queen, I was always intensely interested in past civilizations and their relics. Also I knew that the old wizard's knowledge was extensive and peculiar, however he came by it, and I did not think that he would lie to me in this matter. Indeed, to tell the truth, then and there I made up my mind that if it were in any way possible, I would attempt this journey. "How did people travel to the city, Zikali?" "By sea, I suppose, Macumazahn, but I think that you will be wise not to try that road, since I believe that on the seaside the marshes are now impassable and you will be safer on your feet." "You want me to go on this adventure, Zikali? Why? I know you never do anything without motive." "Oh! Macumazahn, you are clever and see deeper into the trunk of a tree than most. Yes, I want you to go for 3 reasons. First, that you may satisfy your soul on certain matters and I would help you to do so. Secondly, because I want to satisfy mine, and thirdly, because I know that you will come back safe to be a prop to me in things that will happen in days unborn. Otherwise I would have told you nothing of this story, since it is necessary to me that you should remain living beneath the sun." "Have done, Zikali. What is it that you desire?" "Oh, a great deal that I shall get, but chiefly 2 things, so with the rest I will not trouble you. First, I desire to know whether these dreams of mine of a wonderful white witch doctoress, or witch, and of my converse with her are indeed more than dreams. Next I would learn whether certain plots of mine at which I have worked for years, will succeed." "What plots, Zikali, and how can my taking a distant journey tell you anything about them?" "You know them well enough, Macumazahn. They have to do with the overthrow of a royal house that has worked me bitter wrong. As to how your journey can help me, why, thus. You shall promise to me to ask of this queen whether Zikali, opener of roads, shall triumph or be overthrown in that on which he has set his heart. As you seem to know this witch so well, why do you not ask her yourself, Zikali?" "To ask is one thing, Macumazahn. To get an answer is another. I have asked in the watches of the night, and the reply was, 'Come hither and perchance I will tell you.' 'Queen,' I said, 'how can I come save in the spirit, who am an ancient and a crippled dwarf scarcely able to stand upon my feet, Then send a messenger, wizard, and be sure that he is white, for of black savages I have seen more than enough. Let him bear a token also that he comes from you and tell me of it in your sleep. Moreover, let that token be something of power which will protect him on the journey. Such is the answer that comes to me in my dreams, Macumazahn. Well, what token will you give me, Zikali? He groped about in his robe and produced a piece of ivory of the size of a large chessman, that had a hole in it, through which ran a plaited cord of the stiff hairs from an elephant's tail. On this article, which was of a rusty brown color, he breathed, then having whispered to it for a while, handed it to me. I took the talisman, for such I guessed it to be, idly enough, held it to the light to examine it, and started back so violently that almost I let it fall. I do not quite know why I started, but I think it was because some influence seemed to leap from it to me. Zikali started also and cried out. Have a care, Macumazahn. Am I young that I can bear being dashed to the ground? What do you mean? I asked, still staring at the thing which I perceived to be a most wonderfully fashioned likeness of the old dwarf himself as he appeared before me crouched upon the ground. There were the deep-set eyes, the great head, the toad-like shape, the long hair, all. It is a clever carving, is it not, Macumazahn? I am skilled in that art, you know, and therefore can judge of carving. Yes, I know, I answered, bethinking me of another statuette of his which he had given to me on the morrow of the death of her from whom it was modelled. But what of the thing? Macumazahn, it has come down to me through the ages. As you may have heard, all great doctors when they die pass on their wisdom and something of their knowledge to another doctor of spirits who is still living on the earth, that nothing may be lost, or as little as possible. Also I have learned that to such likenesses as these may be given the strength of him or her from whom they were shaped. Now I bethought me of the old Egyptians and their Ka statues of which I had read, and that these statues, magically charmed and set in the tombs of the departed, were supposed to be inhabited everlastingly by the doubles of the dead endued with more power even than ever these possessed in life. But of this I said nothing to Zikali, thinking that it would take too much explanation, though I wondered very much how he had come by the same idea. When that ivory is hung over your heart, Macumazahn, where you must always wear it, learn that with it goes the strength of Zikali, the thought that would have been his thought and the wisdom that is his wisdom, will be your companions, as much as though he walked at your side and could instruct you in every peril. Moreover, north and south and east and west this image is known to men who, when they see it, will bow down and obey, opening a road to him who wears the medicine of the opener of roads. Indeed, I said, smiling, and what is this color on the ivory? I forget, Macumazahn, who have had it a great number of years, ever since it descended to me from a forefather of mine, who was fashioned in the same mold as I am. It looks like blood, does it not? It is a pity that Mamina is not still alive, since she whose memory was so excellent might have been able to tell you, and as he spoke, with a motion that was at once sure and swift, he threw the loop of elephant hair over my head. Hastily I changed the subject, feeling that after his wont this old wizard, the most terrible man whomever I knew, who had been so much concerned with the tragic death of Mamina, was stabbing at me in some hidden fashion. You tell me to go on this journey, I said, and not alone. Yet for companion you give me only an ugly piece of ivory shaped as no man ever was. Here I got one back at Zikali, and from the look of it, steeped in blood, which ivory, if I had my way, I would throw into the campfire. Who, then, am I to take with me? Don't do that, Macumazahn, I mean throw the ivory into the fire, since I have no wish to burn before my time, and if you do, you who have worn it might burn with me. At least certainly you would die with the magic thing and go to acquire knowledge more quickly than you desire. No, no, and do not try to take it off your neck, or rather try if you will. I did try, but something seemed to prevent me from accomplishing my purpose of giving the carving back to Zikali as I wished to do. First my pipe got in the way of my hand, then the elephant hairs caught in the collar of my coat, then a pang of rheumatism to which I was accustomed from an old lion bite, developed of a sudden in my arm, and lastly I grew tired of bothering about the thing. Zikali, who had been watching my movements, burst out into one of his terrible laughs that seemed to fill the whole kloof and to re-echo from its rocky walls. It died away and he went on, without further reference to the talisman or image. You asked whom you were to take with you, Macumazahn. Well, as to this I must make inquiry of those who know. Man, my medicines! From the shadows in the hut behind darted out a tall figure carrying a great spear in one hand and in the other a catskin bag which with a salute he laid down at the feet of his master. This salute, by the way, was that of a Zulu word which means lord or home of ghosts. Zikali groped in the bag and produced from it certain knuckle bones. A common method, he muttered, such as every vulgar wizard uses, but one that is quick and, as the matter concerned is small, will serve my turn. Let us see now, whom you shall take with you, Macumazahn. Then he breathed upon the bones, shook them up in his thin hands and with a quick turn of the wrist, threw them into the air. After this he studied them carefully, where they lay among the ashes which he had raked out of the fire, those that he had used for the making of his map. Do you know a man named Umslopogaas, Macumazahn, the chief of a tribe that is called the People of the Axe, whose titles of praise are Bulalio or the Slaughterer, and Woodpecker, the latter from the way he handles his ancient axe? He is a savage fellow, but one of high blood and higher courage, a great captain in his way, though he will never come to anything, save a glorious death, in your company, I think, Macumazahn. Here he studied the bones again for a while. Yes, I am sure, in your company, though not upon this journey. I have heard of him, I answered cautiously. It is said in the land that he is a son of Choka, the great king of the Zulus. Is it, Macumazahn? And is it said also that he was the slayer of Choka's brother, Dingaan, also the lover of the fairest woman that the Zulus have ever seen, who was called Nada the Lily? Unless indeed a certain Mamina, who, I seem to remember, was a friend of yours, may have been even more beautiful. I know nothing of Nada the Lily, I answered. No, Mamina, the waiting wind, has blown over her fame, so why should you know of one who has been dead a long while? Why also, Macumazahn, do you always bring women into every business? I begin to believe that although you are so strict in a white man's fashion, you must be too fond of them, a weakness which makes for ruin to any man. Well, now, I think that this wolfman, this axeman, this warrior, Umslopogaas should be a good fellow to you on your journey to visit the White Witch, Queen, another woman by the way, Macumazahn, and therefore one of whom you should be careful. Oh. Yes, he will come with you because of a man called Luster and a woman named Manazi, a wife of his who hates him and does not hate Luster. I am almost sure that he will come with you, so do not stop to ask questions about him. Is there anyone else? I inquired. Zikali glanced at the bones again, poking them about in the ashes with his toe, then replied with a yawn. You seem to have a little yellow man in your service, a clever snake who knows how to creep through grass, and when to strike and when to lie hidden. I should take him too, if I were you. You know well that I have such a man, Zikali, a Hottentot named Hans, clever in his way but drunken, very faithful too, since he loved my father before me. He is cooking my supper in the wagon now. Are there to be any others? No, I think you three will be enough, with a guard of soldiers from the People of the Axe, for you will meet with fighting and a ghost or two. Umslopogaas has always one at his elbow named Nada, and perhaps you have several. For instance, there was a certain Mamina whom I always seem to feel about me when you are near, Macumazahn. Why, the wind is rising again, which is odd on so still an evening. Listen to how it wails, yes, and stirs your hair, though mine hangs straight enough. But why do I talk of ghosts, seeing that you travel to seek other ghosts, white ghosts, beyond my ken, who can only deal with those who are black? Good night, Macumazahn, good night. When you return from visiting the White Queen, that great one beneath whose feet I, Zikali, who am also great in my way, am but a grain of dust, come and tell me her answer to my question. Meanwhile, be careful always to wear that pretty little image which I have given you, as a young lover sometimes wears a lock of hair cut from the head of some fool girl that he thinks is fond of him. It will bring you safety and luck, Macumazahn, which, for the most part, is more than the lock of hair does to the lover. Oh! It is a strange world, full of jest to those who can see the strings that work it. I am one of them, and perhaps, Macumazahn, you are another, or will be before all is done or begun. Good night, and good fortune to you on your journeyings, and, Macumazahn, although you are so fond of women, be careful not to fall in love with that White Queen, because it would make others jealous, I mean some whom you have lost sight of for a while. Also I think that being under a curse of her own, she is not one whom you can put into your sack. Aho! Aho-ho! Slave, bring me my blanket, it grows cold, and my medicine also, that which protects me from the ghosts, who are thick tonight. Macumazahn brings them, I think. Aho-ho! I turned to depart, but when I had gone a little way Zikali called me back again and said, speaking very low, when you meet this Umslopogaas, as you will meet him, he who is called the woodpecker and the slaughterer, say these words to him. A bat has been twittering round the hut of the opener of roads, and to his ears it squeaked the name of a certain Luster and the name of a woman called Manazi. Also it twittered another greater name that may not be uttered, that of an elephant who shakes the earth, and said that this elephant sniffs the air with his trunk and grows angry, and sharpens his tusks to dig a certain woodpecker out of his hole in a tree that grows near the Witch Mountain. Say, too, that the opener of roads thinks that this woodpecker would be wise to fly north for a while in the company of one who watches by night, lest harm should come to a bird that pecks at the feet of the great and chatters of it in his nest. Then Zikali waved his hand and I went, wondering into what plot I had stumbled. 2. The Messengers. I did not rest as I should that night, who somehow was never able to sleep well in the neighborhood of the Black Kloof. I suppose that Zikali's constant talk about ghosts, with his hints and innuendos concerning those who were dead, always affected my nerves till, in a subconscious way, I began to believe that such things existed and were hanging about me. Many people are open to the power of suggestion, and I am afraid that I am one of them. However, the sun, which has such strength to kill noxious things, puts an end to ghosts more quickly even than it does to other evil vapors and emanations, and when I woke up to find it shining brilliantly in a pure heaven, I laughed with much heartiness over the whole affair. Going to the spring near which we were outspanned, I took off my shirt to have a good wash, still chuckling at the memory of all the hocus-pocus of my old friend, the opener of roads. While engaged in this matutinal operation, I struck my hand against something and looking, observed that it was the hideous little ivory image of Zikali, which he had set about my neck. The sight of the thing and the memory of his ridiculous talk about it, especially of its assertion that it had come down to him through the ages, which it could not have done, seeing that it was a likeness of himself, irritated me so much that I proceeded to take it off with the full intention of throwing it into the spring. As I was in the act of doing this, from a clump of reeds mixed with bushes, quite close to me, there came a sound of hissing, and suddenly above them appeared the head of a great black imamba, perhaps the deadliest of all our African snakes, and the only one I know which will attack man without provocation. Leaving go of the image, I sprang back in a great hurry towards where my gun lay. Then the snake vanished, and making sure that it had departed to its hole, which was probably at a distance, I returned to the pool, and once more began to take off the talisman in order to consign it to the bottom of the pool. After all, I reflected, it was a hideous and probably a blood-stained thing which I did not in the least wish to wear about my neck like a lady's love token. Just as it was coming over my head, suddenly from the other side of the bush that infernal snake popped up again. This time, it was clear, really intent on business. It began to move towards me in the lightning-like way imambas have, hissing and flicking its tongue. I was too quick for my friend, however, for snatching up the gun that I had lain down beside me, I let it have a charge of buckshot in the neck which nearly cut it in two, so that it fell down and expired with hideous convulsive writhings. Hearing the shot, Hans came running from the wagon to see what was the matter. Hans, I should say, was that same Hottentot who had been the companion of most of my journeyings since my father's day. He was with me when as a young fellow I accompanied Retief to Dingaan's kraal, and like myself, escaped the massacre point too. Also we shared many other adventures, including the great one in the land of the Ivory Child where he slew the huge elephant god, Jana, and himself was slain. But of this journey we did not dream in those days. For the rest, Hans was a most entirely unprincipled person, but as the Boers say, as clever as a wagonload of monkeys. Also he drank when he got the chance. One good quality he had, however, no man was ever more faithful, and perhaps it would be true to say that neither man nor woman ever loved me, unworthy, quite so well. In appearance he rather resembled an antique and dilapidated baboon. His face was wrinkled like a dried nut and his quick little eyes were bloodshot. I never knew what his age was, any more than he did himself, but the years had left him tough as whipcord and absolutely untiring. Lastly, he was perhaps the best hand at following a spoor that ever I knew, and up to 150 yards or so, a very deadly shot with a rifle, especially when he used a little single-barreled, muzzle-loading gun of mine made by Purdy which he named Intumbi or Maiden. Of that gun, however, I have written in the Holy Flower and elsewhere. "What is it, Baas?" he asked. "Here there are no lions, nor any game." "Look the other side of the bush, Hans." He slipped round it, making a wide circle with his usual caution, then, seeing the snake, which was, by the way, I think, the biggest imamba I ever killed, suddenly froze, as it were, in a stiff attitude that reminded me of a pointer when it scents game. Having made sure that it was dead, he nodded and said, "Black mamba, or so you would call it, though I know it for something else." "What else, Hans?" "One of the old witch doctor Zikali's spirits which he sets at the mouth of this kloof to warn him of who comes or goes. I know it well, and so do others. I saw it listening behind a stone when you were up the kloof last evening talking with the opener of roads." "Then Zikali will lack a spirit," I answered, laughing, "which perhaps he will not miss amongst so many. It serves him right for setting the brute on me." "Quite so, Baas. He will be angry. I wonder why he did it," he added suspiciously, "seeing that he is such a friend of yours." "He didn't do it, Hans. These snakes are very fierce and give battle, that is all." Hans paid no attention to my remark, which probably he thought only worthy of a white man who does not understand, but rolled his yellow, bloodshot eyes about, as though in search of explanations. Presently they fell upon the ivory that hung about my neck, and he started. "Why do you wear that pretty likeness of the Great One yonder over your heart, as I have known you do with things that belong to women in past days, Baas? Do you know that it is Zikali's great medicine, nothing less, as everyone does throughout the land? When Zikali sends an order far away, he always sends that image with it, for then he who receives the order knows that he must obey or die. Also the messenger knows that he will come to no harm if he does not take it off, because, Baas, the image is Zikali himself, and Zikali is the image. They are one and the same. Also it is the image of his father's father's father, or so he says." "That is an odd story," I said. Then I told Hans as much as I thought advisable of how this horrid little talisman came into my possession. Hans nodded without showing any surprise. "So we are going on a long journey," he said. "Well, I thought it was time that we did something more than wander about these tame countries selling blankets to stinking old women and so forth, Baas. Moreover, Zikali does not wish that you should come to harm, doubtless because he does wish to make use of you afterwards. Oh. It's safe to talk now when that spirit is away looking for another snake. What were you doing with the great medicine, Baas, when the mamba attacked you?" "Taking it off to throw it into the pool, Hans, as I do not like the thing. I tried twice and each time the imamba appeared." Of course it appeared, bars, and what is more, if you had taken that medicine off and thrown it away you would have disappeared, since the mamba would have killed you. Zikali wanted to show you that, bars, and that is why he set the snake at you. You are a superstitious old fool, Hans. Yes, bars, but my father knew all about that great medicine before me, for he was a bit of a doctor, and so does every wizard and witch for 1,000 miles or more. I tell you, bars, it is known by all though no one ever talks about it, no, not even the king himself. Bars, speaking to you, not with the voice of Hans the old drunkard, but with that of the predicant, your reverend father, who made so good a Christian of me and who tells me to do so from up in heaven where the hot fires are which the wood feeds of itself. I beg you not to try to throw away the medicine again, or if you wish to do so, to leave me behind on this journey. For you see, bars, although I am now so good, almost like one of those angels with the pretty goose's wings in the pictures, I feel that I should like to grow a little better before I go to the place of fires to make report to your reverend father, the predicant. Thinking of how horrified my dear father would be if he could hear all this string of ridiculous nonsense and learn the result of his moral and religious lessons on raw Hottentot material, I burst out laughing. But Hans went on as gravely as a judge. Where the great medicine, bars, wear it, part with the liver inside you before you part with that, bars. It may not be as pretty or smell as sweet as a woman's hair in a little gold bottle, but it is much more useful. The sight of the woman's hair will only make you sick in your stomach and cause you to remember a lot of things which you had much better forget, but the great medicine, or rather Zikali who is in it, will keep the assegais and sickness out of you and turn back bad magic onto the heads of those who sent it, and always bring us plenty to eat and perhaps, if we are lucky, a little to drink too sometimes. Go away, I said, I want to wash. Yes, bars. But with the bars's leave I will sit on the other side of that bush with the gun, not to look at the bars without his clothes, because white people are always so ugly that it makes me feel ill to see them undressed, also because the bars will forgive me, but because they smell. No, not for that, but just to see that no other snake comes. Get out of the road, you dirty little scoundrel, and stop your impudence, I said, lifting my foot suggestively. Thereon he scooted with a subdued grin round the other side of the bush, whence as I knew well he kept his eye fixed on me to be sure that I made no further attempt to take off the great medicine. Now of this talisman I may as well say at once that I am no believer in it or its precious influences. Therefore, although it was useful sometimes, notably twice when Umslopogaas was concerned, I do not know whether personally I should have done better or worse upon that journey if I had thrown it into the pool. It is true, however, that until quite the end of this history when it became needful to do so to save another, I never made any further attempt to remove it from my neck, not even when it rubbed a sore in my skin, because I did not wish to offend the prejudices of Hans. It is true, moreover, that this hideous ivory had a reputation which stretched very far from the place where it was made and was regarded with great reverence by all kinds of queer people, even by the Haggard themselves, of whom presently, as they say in pedigrees, a fact of which I found sundry proofs. Indeed, I saw a first example of it when a little while later I met that great warrior, Umslopogaas, chief of the people of the Axe. For, after determining firmly, for reasons which I will set out, that I would not visit this man, in the end I did so, although by then I had given up any idea of journeying across the Zambezi to look for a mysterious and non-existent witchwoman, as Zikali had suggested that I should do. To begin with, I knew that his talk was all rubbish and, even if it were not, that at the bottom of it was some desire of the opener of roads that I should make a path for him to travel towards an indefinite but doubtless evil object of his own. Further, by this time I had worn through that mood of mine which had caused me to yearn for correspondence with the departed and a certain knowledge of their existence. I wonder whether many people understand, as I do, how entirely distinct and how variable are these moods which sway us, or at any rate some of us, at sundry periods of our lives. As I think I have already suggested, at one time we are all spiritual, at another all physical, at one time we are sure that our lives here are as a dream and a shadow and that the real existence lies elsewhere, at another that these brief days of ours are the only business with which we have to do and that of it we must make the best. At one time we think our loves much more immortal than the stars, at another that they are mere shadows cast by the baleful sun of desire upon the shallow and fleeting water we call life, which seems to flow out of nowhere into nowhere. At one time we are full of faith, at another all such hopes are blotted out by a black wall of nothingness, and so on ad infinitum. Only very stupid people, or humbugs, are or pretend to be, always consistent and unchanging. To return, I determined not only that I would not travel north to seek that which no living man will ever find, certainty as to the future, but also, to show my independence of Zikali, that I would not visit this chief, Umslopogaas. So, having traded all my goods and made a fair profit, on paper, I set myself to return to Natal, proposing to rest a while in my little house at Durban, and told Hans my mind. "Very good, Bars," he said. "I, too, should like to go to Durban. There are lots of things there that we cannot get here," and he fixed his roving eye upon a square-faced gin bottle, which as it happened was filled with nothing stronger than water, because all the gin was drunk. "Yet, Bars, we shall not see the Berea for a long while." "Why do you say that?" I asked sharply. "Oh, Bars, I don't know, but you went to visit the opener of roads, did you not? And he told you to go north and lent you a certain great medicine, did he not?" Here Hans proceeded to light his corncob pipe with an ash from the fire, all the time keeping his beady eyes fixed upon that part of me where he knew the talisman was hung. "Quite true, Hans, but now I mean to show Zikali that I am not his messenger, for south, or north, or east, or west. So tomorrow morning we cross the river and trek for Natal." "Yes, Bars, but then why not cross it this evening? There is still light." "I have said that we will cross it tomorrow morning," I answered with that firmness which I have read always indicates a man of character, "and I do not change my word." "No, Bars, but sometimes other things change besides words. Will the Bars have that buck's leg for supper, or the stuff out of a tin with a dint in it, which we bought at a store 2 years ago? The flies have got at the buck's leg, but I cut out the bits with the maggots on it and ate them myself." Hans was right, things do change, especially the weather. That night, unexpectedly, for when I turned in the sky seemed quite serene, there came a terrible rain long before it was due, which lasted off and on for 3 whole days and continued intermittently for an indefinite period. Needless to say the river, which it would have been so easy to cross on this particular evening, by the morning was a raging torrent, and so remained for several weeks. In despair at length I trekked south to where a ford was reported, which, when reached, proved impracticable. I tried another, a dozen miles further on, which was very hard to come to over boggy land. It looked all right and we were getting across finely, when suddenly one of the wheels sank in an unsuspected hole and there we stuck. Indeed, I believe the wagon, or bits of it, would have remained in the neighborhood of that ford to this day, had I not managed to borrow some extra oxen belonging to a Christian Kaffir, and with their help to drag it back to the bank whence we had started. As it happened I was only just in time, since a new storm which had burst further up the river, brought it down in flood again, a very heavy flood. In this country, England, where I write, there are bridges everywhere and no one seems to appreciate them. If they think of them at all it is to grumble about the cost of their upkeep. I wish they could have experienced what a lack of them means in a wild country during times of excessive rain, and the same remark applied to roads. "You should think more of your blessings, my friends," as the old woman said to her complaining daughter who had twins 2 years running, adding that they might have been triplets. To return, after this I confessed myself beaten and gave up until such time as it should please Providence to turn off the water tap. Trekking out of sight of that infernal river which annoyed me with its constant gurgling, I camped on a comparatively dry spot that overlooked a beautiful stretch of rolling veldt. Towards sunset the clouds lifted and I saw a mile or 2 away a most extraordinary mountain on the lower slopes of which grew a dense forest. Its upper part, which was of bare rock, looked exactly like the seated figure of a grotesque person with the chin resting on the breast. There was the head, there were the arms, there were the knees. Indeed, the whole mass of it reminded me strongly of the effigy of Zikali which was tied about my neck, or rather of Zikali himself. "What is that called?" I said to Hans, pointing to this strange hill, now blazing in the angry fire of the setting sun that had burst out between the storm clouds, which made it appear more ominous even than before. "That is the Witch Mountain, Bars, where the chief Umslopogaas and a blood brother of his who carried a great club used to hunt with the wolves. It is haunted, and in a cave at the top of it lie the bones of Nada the Lily, the fair woman whose name is a song, she who was the love of Umslopogaas. 3. Rubbish, I said, though I had heard something of all that story and remembered that Zikali had mentioned this Nada, comparing her beauty to that of another whom once I knew. "Where then lives the chief Umslopogaas?" "They say that his town is yonder on the plain, Bars. It is called the Place of the Axe and is strongly fortified with a river round most of it, and his people are the people of the Axe. They are a fierce people, and all the country round here is uninhabited because Umslopogaas has cleaned out the tribes who used to live in it, first with his wolves and afterwards in war. He is so strong a chief and so terrible in battle that even Chukka himself was afraid of him, and they say that he brought Dingaan the king to his end because of a quarrel about this Nada. Setiweo, the present king, too leaves him alone and to him he pays no tribute." Whilst I was about to ask Hans from whom he had collected all this information, suddenly I heard sounds, and looking up, saw 3 tall men clad in full herald's dress rushing towards us at great speed. "Here come some chips from the Axe," said Hans, and promptly bolted into the wagon. I did not bolt because there was no time to do so without loss of dignity, but, although I wished I had my rifle with me, just sat still upon my stool and with great deliberation lighted my pipe, taking not the slightest notice of the 3 savage-looking fellows. These, who I noted carried axes instead of assegais, rushed straight at me with the axes raised in such a fashion that anyone unacquainted with the habits of Zulu warriors of the old school might have thought that they intended nothing short of murder. As I expected, however, within about 6 feet of me they halted suddenly and stood there still as statues. For my part, one went on lighting my pipe as though I did not see them, and when at length I was obliged to lift my head, surveyed them with an air of mild interest. Then I took a little book out of my pocket, it was my favourite copy of the Inglesby Legends, and began to read. The passage which caught my eye, if axe be substituted for knife, was not inappropriate. It was from the nurse's story, and runs. "But, oh! What a thing 'tis to see and to know that the bare knife is raised in the hand of the foe, without hope to repel or to ward off the blow." This proceeding of mine astonished them a good deal, who felt that they had, so to speak, missed fire. At last the soldier in the middle said, "Are you blind, white man?" "No, black fellow," I answered, "but I am short-sighted." "Would you be so good as to stand out of my light?" A remark which puzzled them so much that all 3 drew back a few paces. When I had read a little further I came to the following lines. "'Tis plain, as anatomists tell us, that never again shall life revisit the foully slain when once they've been cut through the jugular vein." In my circumstances at that moment this statement seemed altogether too suggestive, so I shut up the book and remarked, "If you are wanderers who want food, as I judge by your being so thin, I am sorry that I have little meat, but my servants will give you what they can." "Ow," said the spokesman, "he calls us wanderers. Either he must be a very great man or he is mad." "You are right. I am a great man," I answered, yawning, "and if you trouble me too much you will see that I can be mad also. Now what do you want?" "We are messengers from the great chief Umslopogaas, captain of the people of the Axe, and we want tribute," answered the man in a somewhat changed tone. "Do you? Then you won't get it. I thought that only the king of Zululand had a right to tribute, and your captain's name is not Setiweo, is it?" "Our captain is king here," said the man still more uncertainly. Is he indeed? Then away with you back to him and tell this king of whom I have never heard, though I have a message for a certain Umslopogaas, that Macumazahn, watcher by night, intends to visit him tomorrow, if he will send a guide at the first light to show the best path for the wagon. Hearken, said the man to his companions, this is Macumazahn himself and no other. Well, we thought it, for who else would have dared? Then they saluted with their axes, calling me chief and other fine names, and departed as they had come, at a run, calling out that my message should be delivered and that doubtless Umslopogaas would send the guide. So it came about that, quite contrary to my intention, after all circumstances brought me to the town of the Axe. Even to the last moment I had not meant to go there, but when the tribute was demanded I saw that it was best to do so, and having once passed my word it could not be altered. Indeed, I felt sure that in this event there would be trouble and that my oxen would be stolen, or worse. So fate having issued its decree, of which Hans's version was that Zikali, or his great medicine, had so arranged things, I shrugged my shoulders and waited. 3. Umslopogaas of the Axe. Next morning at the dawn guides arrived from the town of the Axe, bringing with them a yoke of spare oxen, which showed that its chief was really anxious to see me. So, in due course we inspanned and started, the guides leading us by a rough but practicable road down the steep hillside to the saucer-like plain beneath, where I saw many cattle grazing. Traveling some miles across this plain, we came at last to a river of no great breadth that encircled a considerable Kaffir town on 3 sides, the 4th being protected by a little line of koppies which were joined together with walls. Also the place was strongly fortified with fences and in every other way known to the native mind. With the help of the spare oxen we crossed the river safely at the ford, although it was very full, and on the further side were received by a guard of men, tall, soldier-like fellows, all of them armed with axes as the messengers had been. They led us up to the cattle enclosure in the center of the town, which although it could be used to protect beasts in case of emergency, also served the practical purpose of a public square. Here some ceremony was in progress, for soldiers stood round the kraal while heralds pranced and shouted. At the head of the place in front of the chief's big hut was a little group of people, among whom a big, gaunt man sat upon a stool clad in a warrior's dress with a great and very long axe hafted with wire-lashed rhinoceros horn, laid across his knees. Our guides led me, with Hans sneaking after me like a dejected and low-bred dog, for the wagon had stopped outside the gate, across the kraal to where the heralds shouted and the big man sat yawning. At once I noted that he was a very remarkable person, broad and tall and spare of frame, with long, tough-looking arms and a fierce face which reminded me of that of the late King Dingaan. Also he had a great hole in his head above the temple where the skull had been driven in by some blow, and keen, royal-looking eyes. He looked up and seeing me, cried out, "What? Has a white man come to fight me for the chieftainship of the people of the Axe? Well, he is a small one." "No," I answered quietly, "but Macumazahn, watcher by night, has come to visit you in answer to your request, O Umslopogaas, Macumazahn whose name was known in this land before yours was told of, O Umslopogaas." The chief heard and rising from his seat, lifted the big axe in salute. "I greet you, O Macumazahn," he said, "who although you are small in stature, are very great indeed in fame. Have I not heard how you conquered Bangu, although Saduko slew him, and of how you gave up the 600 head of cattle to Chosa and the men of the Amangwane who fought with you, the cattle that were your own? Have I not heard how you led the Tulwana against the Usutu and stamped flat 3 of Setiweo's regiments in the days of Panda, although, alas, because of an oath of mine I lifted no steel in that battle, I who will have nothing to do with those that spring from the blood of Sinzangakona, perhaps because I smell too strongly of it, Macumazahn. Oh, yes, I have heard these and many other things concerning you, though until now it has never been my fortune to look upon your face, O watcher by night, and therefore I greet you well, bold one, cunning one, upright one, friend of us black people." "Thank you," I answered, "but you said something about fighting. If there is to be anything of the sort, let us get it over. If you want to fight, I am quite ready, and I tapped the rifle which I carried. The grim chief broke into a laugh and said, "Listen. By an ancient law any man on this day in each year may fight me for this chieftainship, as I fought and conquered him who held it before me, and take it from me with my life and the axe, though of late none seems to like the business. But that law was made before there were guns, or men like Macumazahn who, it is said, can hit a lizard on a wall at 50 paces. Therefore I tell you that if you wish to fight me with a rifle, O Macumazahn, I give in and you may have the chieftainship," and he laughed again in his fierce fashion. "I think it is too hot for fighting either with guns or axes, and chieftainships are honey that is full of stinging bees," I answered. Then I took my seat on a stool that had been brought for me and placed by the side of Umslopogaas, after which the ceremony went on. The heralds cried out the challenge to all and sundry to come and fight the holder of the axe for the chieftainship of the axe without the slightest result, since nobody seemed to desire to do anything of the sort. Then, after a pause, Umslopogaas rose, swinging his formidable weapon round his head, and declared that by right of conquest he was chief of the tribe for the ensuing year, an announcement that everybody accepted without surprise. Again the herald summoned all and sundry who had grievances, to come forward and to state them and receive redress. After a little pause there appeared a very handsome woman with large eyes, particularly brilliant eyes that rolled as though they were in search of someone. She was finely dressed, and I saw by the ornaments she wore that she held the rank of a chief's wife. "I, Manazi, have a complaint to make," she said, "as it is the right of the humblest to do on this day. In succession to Zinata whom Dingaan slew with her children, I am your Inkosikaas, your head wife, O Umslopogaas." "That I know well enough," said Umslopogaas, "what of it?" "This, that you neglect me for other women, as you neglected Zinata for Nada the beautiful, Nada the witch. I am childless, as are all your wives, because of the curse that this Nada left behind her. I demand that this curse should be lifted from me. For your sake I abandoned Luster the chief, to whom I was betrothed, and this is the end of it, that I am neglected and childless. Am I the heavens above that I can cause you to bear children, woman?" asked Umslopogaas angrily. "Would that you had clung to Luster, my blood brother and my friend, whom you lament, and left me alone." "That still may chance, if I am not better treated," answered Manazi with a flash of her eyes. "Will you dismiss yonder new wife of yours and give me back my place, and will you lift the curse of Nada off me, or will you not?" "As to the first," answered Umslopogaas, "learn, Manazi, that I will not dismiss my new wife, who at least is gentler-tongued and true-hearted than you are. As to the second, you ask that which it is not in my power to give, since children are the gift of heaven, and barrenness is its bane. Moreover, you have done ill to bring into this matter the name of one who is dead, who of all women was the sweetest and most innocent. Lastly, I warn you before the people to cease from your plottings or traffic with Luster, lest ill come of them to you, or him, even though he be my blood brother, or to both." "Plottings," cried Manazi in a shrill and furious voice. "Does Umslopogaas talk of plottings? Well, I have heard that Chokka the lion left a son, and that this son has set a trap for the feet of him who sits on Chokka's throne. Perchance that king has heard it also, perchance the people of the axe will soon have another chief." "Is it thus?" said Umslopogaas quietly. "And if so, will he be named Luster?" Then his smouldering wrath broke out, and in a kind of roaring voice he went on. "What have I done that the wives of my bosom should be my betrayers, those who would give me to death? Zinata betrayed me to Dingaan and in reward was slain, and my children with her. Now would you, Manazi, betray me to Setiweo, though in truth there is naught to betray? Well, if so, bethink you and let Luster bethink him of what chance to Zinata, and of what chances to those who stand before the axe of Umslopogaas. What have I done, I say, that women should thus strive to work me ill?" "This," answered Manazi with a mocking laugh, "that you have loved one of them too well. If he would live in peace, he who has wives should favor all alike. Least of anything should he moan continually over one who is dead, a witch who has left a curse behind her and thus insulted and do wrong to the living. Also he would be wise to attend to the matters of his own tribe and household and to cease from ambitions that may bring him to the assegai, and them with him. I have heard your counsel, wife, so now begone, said Umslopogaas, looking at her very strangely, and it seemed to me not without fear. Have you wives, Macumazahn? He asked of me in a low voice when she was out of hearing. Only among the spirits, I answered. Well for you then, moreover, it is a bond between us, for I too have but one true wife and she also is among the spirits. But go rest a while, and later we will talk. So I went, leaving the chief to his business, thinking as I walked away of a certain message with which I was charged for him and of how into that message came names that I had just heard, namely that of a man called Luster and of a woman called Manazi. Also I thought of the hints which in her jealous anger and disappointment at her lack of children, this woman had dropped about a plot against him who sat on the throne of Choka, which of course must mean King Setiweo himself. I came to the guest hut, which proved to be a very good place and clean. Also in it I found plenty of food made ready for me and for my servants. After eating I slept for a time as it is always my fashion to do when I have nothing else on hand, since who knows for how long he may be kept awake at night. Indeed, it was not until the sun had begun to sink that a messenger came, saying that the chief desired to see me if I had rested. So I went to his big hut which stood alone with a strong fence set round it at a distance, so that none could come within hearing of what was said, even at the door of the hut. I observed also that a man armed with an axe kept guard at the gateway in this fence round which he walked from time to time. The chief Umslopogaas was seated on a stool by the door of his hut with his rhinoceros horn-handled axe which was fastened to his right wrist by a thong, leaning against his thigh, and a wolf skin hanging from his broad shoulders. Very grim and fierce he looked thus, with the red light of the sunset playing on him. He greeted me and pointed to another stool on which I sat myself down. Apparently he had been watching my eyes, for he said, I see that like other creatures which move at night, such as leopards and hyenas, you take note of all, O watcher by night, even of the soldier who guards this place and of where the fence is set and of how its gate is fashioned. Had I not done so I should have been dead long ago, O chief. Yes, and because it is not my nature to do so as I should, perchance I shall soon be dead. It is not enough to be fierce and foremost in the battle, Macumazahn. He who would sleep safe and of whom, when he dies, folk will say he has eaten, i.e., he has lived out his life, must do more than this. He must guard his tongue and even his thoughts. He must listen to the stirring of rats in the thatch and look for snakes in the grass. He must trust few, and least of all those who sleep upon his bosom. But those who have the lion's blood in them or who are prone to charge like a buffalo, often neglect these matters and therefore in the end they fall into a pit. Yes, I answered, especially those who have the lion's blood in them, whether that lion be man or beast. This I said because of the rumors I had heard that this slaughterer was in truth the son of Choka. Therefore not knowing whether or no he were playing on the word lion, which was Choka's title, I wished to draw him, especially as I saw in his face a great likeness to Choka's brother Dingaan, whom, it was whispered, this same Umslopogaas had slain. As it happened I failed, for after a pause he said, Why do you come to visit me, Macumazahn, who have never done so before? I do not come to visit you, Umslopogaas. That was not my intention. You brought me, or rather the flooded rivers and you together brought me, for I was on my way to Natal and could not cross the drifts. Yet I think you have a message for me, white man, for not long ago a certain wandering witch doctor who came here told me to expect you and that you had words to say to me. Did he, Umslopogaas? Well, it is true that I have a message, though it is one that I did not mean to deliver. Yet being here, perchance you will deliver it, Macumazahn, for those who have messages and will not speak them, sometimes come to trouble. Yes, being here, I will deliver it, seeing that so it seems to be fated. Tell me, Do you chance to know a certain small one who is great, a certain old one whose brain is young, a doctor who is called Open of Roads? I have heard of him, as have my forefathers for generations. Indeed, and if it pleases you to tell me, Umslopogaas, what might be the names of those forefathers of yours, who have heard of this doctor for generations? They must have been short-lived men, and as such I should like to know of them. That ye cannot, replied Umslopogaas shortly, since they are Honopa, i.e. not to be spoken, in this land. Indeed, I said again. I thought that rule applied only to the names of kings, but of course I am but an ignorant white man who may well be mistaken on such matters of your Zulu customs. Yes, O Macumazahn, you may be mistaken or you may not. It matters nothing. But what of this message of yours? It came at the end of a long story, O Bulalio. But since you seek to know, these were the words of it, so nearly as I can remember them. Then sentence by sentence I repeated to him all that Zikali had said to me when he called me back after bidding me farewell, which doubtless he did because he wished to cut his message more deeply into the tablets of my mind. Umslopogaas listened to every syllable with a curious intentness, and then asked me to repeat it all again, which I did. Luster. Manazi, he said slowly. Well, you heard those names today, did you not, white man? And you heard certain things from the lips of this Manazi who was angry, that give color to that talk of the Open of Roads. It seems to me, he added, glancing about him and speaking in a low voice, that what I suspected is true and that without doubt I am betrayed. I do not understand, I replied indifferently. All this talk is dark to me, as is the message of the Open of Roads, or rather its meaning. By whom and about what are you betrayed? Let that snake sleep. Do not kick it with your foot. Suffice it you to know that my head hangs upon this matter, that I am a rat in a forked stick, and if the stick is pressed on by a heavy hand, then where is the rat? Where all rats go, I suppose, that is, unless they are wise rats that bite the hand which holds the stick before it is pressed down. What is the rest of this story of yours, Macumazahn, which was told before the Opener of Roads gave you that message? Does it please you to repeat it to me that I may judge of it with my ears? Certainly, I answered, on one condition, that what the ears hear, the heart shall keep to itself alone. Umslopogaas stooped and laid his hand upon the broad blade of the weapon beside him, saying, By the axe I swear it. If I break the oath be the axe my doom. Then I told him the tale, as I have set it down already, thinking to myself that of it he would understand little, being but a wild warrior man. As it chanced, however, I was mistaken, for he seemed to understand a great deal, perchance because such primitive natures are in closer touch with high and secret things than we imagine, perchance for other reasons with which I became acquainted later. It stands thus, he said when I had finished, or so I think. You, Macumazahn, seek certain women who are dead to learn whether they still live, or are really dead, but so far have failed to find them. Still seeking, you ask the counsel of Zikali, Opener of Roads, he who among other titles is also called Home of Spirits. He answered that he could not satisfy your heart because this tree was too tall for him to climb, but that far to the north there lives a certain white witch who has powers greater than his, being able to fly to the top of any tree, and to this white witch he bade you go. Have I the story right thus far? I answered that he had. Good. Then Zikali went on to choose you companions for your journey, but two, leaving out the guards or servants. I, Umslopogaas, called Bulalio the slaughterer, called the woodpecker also, was one of these, and that little yellow monkey of a man whom I saw with you today, called Hansi, was the other. Then you made a mock of Zikali by determining not to visit me, Umslopogaas, and not to go north to find the great white queen of whom he had told you, but to return to Natal. Is that so? I said it was. Then the rain fell and the winds blew and the rivers rose in wrath so that you could not return to Natal, and after all by chance, or by fate, or by the will of Zikali, the wizard of wizards, you drifted here to the kraal of me, Umslopogaas, and told me this story. Just so, I answered. Well, white man, how am I to know that all this is not but a trap for my feet which already seem to feel cords between the toes of both of them? What token do you bring, O watcher by night? How am I to know that the opener of roads really sent me this message which has been delivered so strangely by one who wished to travel on another path? The wandering witch doctor told me that he who came would bear some sign. I can't say, I answered, at least in words. But, I added after reflection, as you ask for a token, perhaps I might be able to show you something that would bring proof to your heart, if there were any secret place. Umslopogaas walked to the gateway of the fence and saw that the sentry was at his post. Then he walked round the hut casting an eye upon its roof, and muttered to me as he returned. Once I was caught thus. There lived a certain wife of mine who set her ear to the smoke hole and so brought about the death of many, and among them of herself and of our children. Enter. All is safe. Yet if you talk, speak low. So we went into the hut taking the stools with us, and seated ourselves by the fire that burned there, onto which Umslopogaas threw chips of resinous wood. Now, he said. I opened my shirt and by the clear light of the flame showed him the image of Zikali which hung about my neck. He stared at it, though touch it he would not. Then he stood up and lifting his great axe, he saluted the image with the word Makosi, the salute that is given to great wizards because they are supposed to be the home of many spirits. It is the big medicine, the medicine itself, he said, that which has been known in the land since the time of Sinzangakona, the father of the Zulu royal house, and as it is said, before him. How can that be? I asked, seeing that this image represents Zikali, opener of roads, as an old man, and Sinzangakona died many years ago. I do not know, he answered, but it is so. Listen. There was a certain Mopo, or as some called him, Umbopo, who was Choka's body servant and my foster father, and he told me that twice this medicine, and he pointed to the image, was sent to Choka, and that each time the lion obeyed the message that came with it. A third time it was sent, but he did not obey the message, and then where was Choka? Here Umslopogaas passed his hand across his mouth, a significant gesture amongst the Zulus. Mopo, I said, yes, I have heard the story of Mopo, also that Choka's body became his servant in the end, since Mopo killed him with the help of the princes Dingaan and Umlangana. Also I have heard that this Mopo still lives, though not in Zululand. Does he, Macumazahn, said Umslopogaas, taking snuff from a spoon and looking at me keenly over the spoon. You seem to know a great deal, Macumazahn, too much as some might think. Yes, I answered, perhaps I do know too much, or at any rate more than I want to know. For instance, O fosterling of Mopo and son of, was the lady named Belika, I know a good deal about you. Umslopogaas stared at me and laying his hand upon the great axe, half rose. Then he sat down again. I think that this, and I touched the image of Zikali upon my breast, would turn even the blade of the axe named Groanmaker, I said and paused. As nothing happened, I went on, for instance, again I think I know, or have I dreamed it, that a certain chief, whose mother's name I believe was Belika, by the way, was she not one of Choka's sisters, has been plotting against that son of Panda who sits upon the throne, and that his plots have been betrayed, so that he is in some danger of his life. Macumazahn, said Umslopogaas hoarsely, I tell you that did you not wear the great medicine on your breast, I would kill you where you sit and bury you beneath the floor of the hut, as one who knows too much. It would be a mistake, Umslopogaas, one of the many that you have made. But as I do wear the medicine, the question does not arise, does it? Again he made no answer and I went on, and now, what about this journey to the north? If indeed I must make it, would you wish to accompany me? Umslopogaas rose from the stool and crawled out of the hut, apparently to make some inspection. Presently he returned and remarked that the night was clear although there were heavy storm clouds on the horizon, by which I understood him to convey in Zulu metaphor that it was safe for us to talk, but that danger threatened from afar. Macumazahn, he said, we speak under the blanket of the opener of roads who sits upon your heart, and whose sign you bring to me, as he sent me word that you would, do we not? I suppose so, I answered. At any rate we speak as man to man, and hitherto the honor of Macumazahn has not been doubted in Zululand. So if you have anything to say, Chief Bulalio, say it at once, for I am tired and should like to eat and rest. Good, Macumazahn. I have this to say. I who am the son of one who was greater than he, have plotted to seize the throne of Zululand from him who sits upon that throne. It is true, for I grew weary of my idleness as a petty chief. Moreover, I should have succeeded with the help of Zikali, who hates the house of Sinzangakona, though me, who am of its blood, he does not hate, because ever I have striven against that house. But it seems from his message and those words spoken by an angry woman, that I have been betrayed, and that tonight or tomorrow night, or by the next moon, the slayers will be upon me, smiting me before I can smite, at which I cannot grumble. By whom have you been betrayed, Umslopogaas? By that wife of mine, as I think, Macumazahn. Also by Lustre, my blood brother, over whom she has cast her net and made false to me, so that he hopes to win her whom he has always loved and with her the chieftainship of the axe. Now what shall I do, tell me, you whose eyes can see in the dark? I thought a moment and answered, I think that if I were you, I would leave this Lustre to sit in my place for a while as chief of the people of the axe, and take a journey north, Umslopogaas. Then if trouble comes from the great house where a king sits, it will come to Lustre who can show that the people of the axe are innocent and that you are far away. That is cunning, Macumazahn. There speaks the great medicine. If I go north, who can say that I have plotted, and if I leave my betrayer in my place, who can say that I was a traitor, who have set him where I used to sit and left the land upon a private matter? And now tell me of this journey of yours. So I told him everything, although until that moment I had not made up my mind to go upon this journey, I who had come here to his kraal by accident, or so it seemed, and by accident had delivered to him a certain message. You wish to consult a white witch doctoress, Macumazahn, who according to Zikali lives far to the north, as to the dead. Now I too, though perchance you will not think it of a black man, desire to learn of the dead, yes, of a certain wife of my youth who was sister and friend as well as wife, whom too I loved better than all the world. Also I desire to learn of a brother of mine whose name I never speak, who ruled the wolves with me and who died at my side on yonder witch mountain, having made him a mat of men to lie on in a great and glorious fight. For of him as of the woman I think all day and dream all night, and I would know if they still live anywhere and I may look to see them again when I have died as a warrior should and as I hope to do. Do you understand, watcher by night? I answered that I understood very well, as his case seemed to be like my own. It may happen, went on Umslopogaas, that all this talk of the dead who are supposed to live after they are dead, is but as the sound of wind whispering in the reeds at night, that comes from nowhere and goes nowhere and means nothing. But at least ours will be a great journey in which we shall find adventure and fighting, since it is well known in the land that wherever Macumazahn goes there is plenty of both. Also it seems well for reasons that have been spoken of between us, as Zikali says, that I should leave the country of the Zulus for a while, who desire to die a man's death at the last and not to be trapped like a jackal in a pit. Lastly I think that we shall agree well together though my temper is rough at times, and that neither of us will desert the other in trouble, though of that little yellow dog of yours I am not so sure. I answer for him, I replied. Hans is a true man, cunning also when once he is away from drink. Then we spoke of plans for our journey, and of when and where we should meet to make it, talking till it was late, after which I went to sleep in the guest hut. 4. The Lion and the Axe. Next day early I left the town of the people of the axe, having bid a formal farewell to Umslopogaas, saying in a voice that all could hear that as the rivers were still flooded, I proposed to trek to the northern parts of Zululand and trade there until the weather was better. Our private arrangement, however, was that on the night of the next full moon, which happened about 4 weeks later, we should meet at the eastern foot of a certain great, flat-topped mountain known to both of us, which stands to the north of Zululand but well beyond its borders. So northward I trekked, slowly to spare my oxen, trading as I went. The details do not matter, but as it happened I met with more luck upon that journey than had come my way for many a long year. Although I worked on credit since nearly all my goods were sold, as owing to my repute I could always do in Zululand, I made some excellent bargains in cattle, and to top up with, bought a large lot of ivory so cheap that really I think it must have been stolen. All of this, cattle and ivory together, I sent to Natal in charge of a white friend of mine whom I could trust, where the stuff was sold very well indeed, and the proceeds paid to my account, the trade equivalents being duly remitted to the native vendors. In fact, my good fortune was such that if I had been superstitious like Hans, I should have been inclined to attribute it to the influence of Zikali's great medicine. As it was, I knew it to be one of the chances of a trader's life and accepted it with a shrug as often as I had been accustomed to do in the alternative of losses. Only one untoward incident happened to me. Of a sudden a party of the king's soldiers under the command of a well-known induna or counselor, arrived and insisted upon searching my wagon, as I thought at first in connection with that cheap lot of ivory which had already departed to Natal. However, never a word did they say of ivory, nor indeed was a single thing belonging to me taken by them. I was very indignant and expressed my feelings to the induna in no measured terms. He on his part was most apologetic, and explained that what he did he was obliged to do by the king's orders. Also he let it slip that he was seeking for a certain evildoer who, it was thought, might be with me without my knowing his real character, and as this evildoer, whose name he would not mention, was a very fierce man, it had been necessary to bring a strong guard with him. Now I bethought me of Umslopogaas, but merely looked blank and shrugged my shoulders, saying that I was not in the habit of consorting with evildoers. Still unsatisfied, the induna questioned me as to the places where I had been during this journey of mine in the Zulu country. I told him with the utmost frankness, mentioning among others, because I was sure that already he knew all my movements well, the town of the people of the axe. Then he asked me if I had seen its chief, a certain Umslopogaas or Bulalio. I answered, yes, that I had met him there for the first time and thought him a very remarkable man. With this the induna agreed emphatically, saying that perhaps I did not know how remarkable. Next he asked me where he was now, to which I replied that I had not the faintest idea, but I presumed in his kraal where I had left him. The induna explained that he was not in his kraal, that he had gone away leaving one Luster and his own head wife Manazi to administer the chieftainship for a while, because, as he stated, he wished to make a journey. I yawned as if weary of the subject of this chief, and indeed of the whole business. Then the induna said that I must come to the king and repeat to him all the words that I had spoken. I replied that I could not possibly do so as, having finished my trading, I had arranged to go north to shoot elephants. He answered that elephants lived a long while and would not die while I was visiting the king. Then followed an argument which grew heated and ended in his declaring that to the king I must come, even if he had to take me there by force. I sat silent, wondering what to say or do, and leant forward to pick a piece of wood out of the fire wherewith to light my pipe. Now my shirt was not buttoned, and as it chanced this action caused the ivory image of Zikali that hung about my neck to appear between its edges. The induna saw it and his eyes grew big with fear. "Hide that," he whispered, "hide that, lest it should bewitch me. Indeed, already I feel as though I were being bewitched. It is the great medicine itself." "That will certainly happen to you," I said, yawning again, "if you insist upon my taking a week's trek to visit the Black One, or interfere with me in any way now or afterwards," and I lifted my hand towards the talisman, looking him steadily in the face. "Perhaps after all, Macumazahn, it is not necessary for you to visit the king," he said in an uncertain voice. "I will go and make report to him that you know nothing of this evildoer." And he went in such a hurry that he never waited to say goodbye. Next morning before the dawn I went also and trekked steadily until I was clear of Zululand. In due course and without accident, for the weather, which had been so wet, had now turned beautifully fine and dry, we came to the great, flat-topped hill that I have mentioned, trekking thither over high, sparsely timbered veldt that offered few difficulties to the wagon. This peculiar hill, known to such natives as lived in those parts by a long word that means hut with a flat roof, is surrounded by forest, for here trees grow wonderfully well, perhaps because of the water that flows from its slopes. Forcing our way through this forest, which was full of game, I reached its eastern foot and there camped, 5 days before that night of full moon on which I had arranged to meet Umslopogaas. That I should meet him I did not in the least believe, firstly because I thought it very probable that he would have changed his mind about coming, and secondly for the excellent reason that I expected he had gone to call upon the king against his will, as I had been asked to do. It was evident to me that he was up to his eyes in some serious plot against Cetshwayo, in which he was the old dwarf Zikali's partner, or rather, tool, also that his plot had been betrayed, with the result that he was wanted and would have little chance of passing safely through Zululand. So taking one thing with another I imagined that I had seen his grim face and his peculiar, ancient-looking axe for the last time. To tell the truth I was glad. Although at first the idea had appealed to me a little, I did not want to make this wild goose, or wild witch chase through unknown lands to seek for a totally fabulous person who dwelt far across the Zambezi. I had, as it were, been forced into the thing, but if Umslopogaas did not appear, my obligations would be at an end and I should return to Natal at my leisure. First, however, I would do a little shooting since I found that a large herd of elephants haunted this forest. Indeed I was tempted to attack them at once, but did not do so since, as Hans pointed out, if we were going north it would be difficult to carry the ivory, especially if we had to leave the wagon, and I was too old a hunter to desire to kill the great beasts for the fun of the thing. So I just sat down and rested, letting the oxen feed throughout the hours of light on the rich grasses which grew upon the bottommost slopes of the big mountain where we were camped by a stream, not more than 100 yards above the timber line. At some time or other there had been a native village at this spot, probably the Zulus had cleaned it out in long past years, for I found human bones black with age lying in the long grass. Indeed, the cattle kraal still remained and in such good condition that by piling up a few stones here and there on the walls and closing the narrow entrances with thorn bushes, we could still use it to enclose our oxen at night. This I did for fear lest there should be lions about, though I had neither seen nor heard them. So the days went by pleasantly enough with lots to eat, since whenever we wanted meat I had only to go a few yards to shoot a fat buck at a spot whither they trekked to drink in the evening, till at last came the time of full moon. Of this I was also glad, since, to tell the truth, I had begun to be bored. Rest is good, but for a man who has always led an active life too much of it is very bad, for then he begins to think and thought in large doses is depressing. Of the fire-eating Umslopogaas there was no sign, so I made up my mind that on the morrow I would start after those elephants and when I had shot, or failed to shoot, some of them, return to Natal. I felt unable to remain idle any more, it never was my gift to do so, which is perhaps why I employ my ample leisure here in England in jotting down such reminiscences as these. Well, the full moon came up in silver glory and after I had taken a good look at her for luck, also at all the veldt within sight, I turned in. An hour or two later some noise from the direction of the cattle kraal woke me up. As it did not recur, I thought that I would go to sleep again. Then an uneasy thought came to me that I could not remember having looked to see whether the entrance was properly closed, as it was my habit to do. It was the same sort of troublesome doubt which in a civilized house makes a man get out of bed and go along the cold passages to the sitting room to see whether he has put out the lamp. It always proves that he has put it out, but that does not prevent a repetition of the performance next time the perplexity arises. I reflected that perhaps the noise was caused by the oxen pushing their way through the carelessly closed entrance, and at any rate that I had better go to see. So I slipped on my boots and a coat and went without waking Hans or the boys, only taking with me a loaded, single-barreled rifle which I used for shooting small buck, but no spare cartridges. Now in front of the gateway of the cattle kraal, shading it, grew a single big tree of the wild fig order. Passing under this tree, I looked and saw that the gateway was quite securely closed, as now I remembered I had noted at sunset. Then I started to go back, but had not stepped more than 2 or 3 paces when, in the bright moonlight, I saw the head of my smallest ox, a beast of the Zulu breed, suddenly appear over the top of the wall. About this there would have been nothing particularly astonishing, had it not been for the fact that this head belonged to a dead animal, as I could tell from the closed eyes and the hanging tongue. What in the name of goodness, I began to myself, when my reflections were cut short by the appearance of another head, that of one of the biggest lions I ever saw, which had the ox by the throat, and with the enormous strength that is given to these creatures, by getting its back beneath the body, was deliberately hoisting it over the wall, to drag it away to devour at its leisure. There was the brute within 12 feet of me, and what is more, it saw me as I saw it, and stopped, still holding the ox by the throat. What a chance for Allan Quatermain! Of course he shot it dead. One can fancy anyone saying who knows me by repute, also that by the gift of God I am handy with a rifle. Well, indeed, it should have been, for even with the small bore piece that I carried, a bullet ought to have pierced through the soft parts of its throat to the brain and to have killed that lion as dead as Julius Caesar. Theoretically the thing was easy enough, indeed, although I was startled for a moment. By the time that I had the rifle to my shoulder I had little fear of the issue, unless there was a misfire, especially as the beast seemed so astonished that it remained quite still. Then the unexpected happened, as generally it does in life, particularly in hunting, which, in my case, is a part of life. I fired, but by misfortune the bullet struck the tip of the horn of that confounded ox, which tip either was or at that moment fell in front of the spot on the lion's throat whereat half unconsciously I had aimed. Result, the ball was turned and, departing at an angle, just cut the skin of the lion's neck deeply enough to hurt it very much and to make it madder than all the hatters in the world. Dropping the ox, with a most terrific roar it came over the wall at me. I remember that there seemed to be yards of it, I mean of the lion, in front of which appeared a cavernous mouth full of gleaming teeth. I skipped back with much agility, also a little to one side, because there was nothing else to do, reflecting in a kind of inconsequent way, that after all Zikali's great medicine was not worth a curse. The lion landed on my side of the wall and reared itself upon its hind legs before getting to business, towering high above me but slightly to my left. Then I saw a strange thing. A shadow thrown by the moon flitted past me. All I noted of it was the distorted shape of a great, lifted axe, probably because the axe came first. The shadow fell, and with it another shadow, that of a lion's paw dropping to the ground. Next there was a most awful noise of roaring, and wheeling round I saw such a fray as never I shall see again. A tall, grim, black man was fighting the great lion, that now lacked one paw, but still stood upon its hind legs, striking at him with the other. The man, who was absolutely silent, dodged the blow and hit back with the axe, catching the beast upon the breast with such weight that it came to the ground in a lopsided fashion, since now it had only one forefoot on which to light. The axe flashed up again, and before the lion could recover itself, or do anything else, fell with a crash upon its skull, sinking deep into the head. After this all was over, for the beast's brain was cut in two. "I am here at the appointed time, Macumazahn," said Umslopogaas, for it was he, as with difficulty he dragged his axe from the lion's severed skull, "to find you watching by night as it is reported that you always do." "No," I retorted, for his tone irritated me, "you are late, Bulalio, the moon has been up some hours." "I said, O Macumazahn, that I would meet you on the night of the full moon, not at the rising of the moon." "That is true," I replied, mollified, "and at any rate you came at a good moment." "Yes," he answered, "though as it happens in this clear light the thing was easy to anyone who can handle an axe. Had it been darker the end might have been different. But, Macumazahn, you are not so clever as I thought, since otherwise you would not have come out against a lion with a toy like that," and he pointed to the little rifle in my hand. "I did not know that there was a lion, Umslopogaas." That is why you are not so clever as I thought, since of one sort or another there is always a lion which wise men should be prepared to meet, Macumazahn. You are right again, I replied. At that moment Hans arrived upon the scene, followed at a discreet distance by the wagon boys, and took in the situation at a glance. The great medicine of the opener of roads has worked well, was all he said. The great medicine of the opener of heads has worked better, remarked Umslopogaas with a little laugh and pointing to his red axe. Never before since she came into my keeping has Umslopogaas, i.e. chieftainess, for so was this famous weapon named, sunk so low as to drink the blood of beasts. Still, the stroke was a good one, so she need not be ashamed. But, yellow man, how comes it that you who, I have been told, are cunning, watch your master so ill? I was asleep, stuttered Hans indignantly. Those who serve should never sleep, replied Umslopogaas sternly. Then he turned and whistled, and behold! Out of the long grass that grew at a little distance, emerged 12 great men, all of them bearing axes and wearing cloaks of hyena skins, who saluted me by raising their axes. Set a watch and skin me this beast by dawn. It will make us a mat, said Umslopogaas, whereon again they saluted silently and melted away. Who are these? I asked. A few picked warriors whom I brought with me, Macumazahn. There were 1 or 2 more, but they got lost on the way. Then we went to the wagon and spoke no more that night. Next morning I told Umslopogaas of the visit I had received from the induna of the king who wished me to come to the royal kraal. He nodded and said, As it chances certain thieves attacked me on my journey, which is why 1 or 2 of my people remain behind who will never travel again. We made good play with those thieves, not one of them escaped, he added grimly, and their bodies we threw into a river where are many crocodiles. But their spears I brought away, and I think that they are such as the king's guard use. If so, his search for them will be long, since the fight took place where no man lives and we burned the shields and trappings. Aho! He will think that the ghosts have taken them. That morning we trekked on fast, fearing lest a regiment searching for these thieves should strike and follow our spoor. Luckily the ox that the lion had killed was one of some spare cattle which I was driving with me, so its loss did not inconvenience us. As we went Umslopogaas told me that he had duly appointed Luster and his wife Manazi to rule the tribe during his absence, an office which they accepted doubtfully, Manazi acting as chieftainess and Luster as her head induna or counsellor. I asked him whether he thought this wise under all the circumstances, seeing that it had occurred to me since I made the suggestion, that they might be unwilling to surrender power on his return, also that other domestic complications might ensue. It matters little, Macumazahn, he said with a shrug of his great shoulders, for of this I am sure, that I have played my part with the people of the axe, and to stop among them would have meant my death, who am a man betrayed. What do I care who love none and now have no children? Still, it is true that I might have fled to Natal with the cattle and there have led a fat and easy life. But ease and plenty I do not desire, who would live and fall as a warrior should. Never again, mayhap, shall I see the ghost mountain where the wolves ravened and the old witch sits in stone waiting for the world to die, or sleep in the town of the people of the axe. What do I want with wives and oxen while I have Umslopogaas the groan maker, and she is true to me, he added, shaking the ancient axe above his head so that the sun gleamed upon the curved blade and the hollow gouge or point at the back beyond the shaft socket. Where the axe goes, there go the strength and virtue of the axe, O Macumazahn. It is a strange weapon, I said. Aye, a strange and an old, forged far away, says Zikali, by a warrior wizard hundreds of years ago, a great fighter who was also the first of smiths and who sits in the underworld waiting for it to return to his hand when its work is finished beneath the sun. That will be soon, Macumazahn, since Zikali told me that I am the last holder of the axe. Did you then see the opener of roads? I asked. Aye, I saw him. He it was who told me which way to go to escape from Zululand. Also he laughed when he heard how the flooded rivers brought you to my kraal, and sent you a message in which he said that the spirit of a snake had told him that you tried to throw the great medicine into a pool, but was stopped by that snake, whilst it was still alive. This, he said, you must do no more, lest he should send another snake to stop you. Did he? I replied indignantly, for Zikali's power of seeing or learning about things that happened at a distance puzzled and annoyed me. Only Hans grinned and said, I told you so, Bars. On we travelled from day to day, meeting with such difficulties and dangers as are common on roadless veldt in Africa, but no more, for the grass was good and there was plenty of game, of which we shot what we wanted for meat. Indeed, here in the back regions of what is known as Portuguese Southeast Africa, every sort of wild animal was so numerous that personally I wished we could turn our journey into a shooting expedition. But of this Umslopogaas, whom hunting bored, would not hear. In fact, he was much more anxious than myself to carry out our original purpose. When I asked him why, he answered because of something Zikali had told him. What this was he would not say, except that in the country whither we wandered he would fight a great fight and win much honor. Now Umslopogaas was by nature a fighting man, one who took a positive joy in battle, and like an old Norseman, seemed to think that thus only could a man decorously die. This amazed me, a peaceful person who loves quiet and a home. Still, I gave way, partly to please him, partly because I hoped that we might discover something of interest, and still more because, having once undertaken an enterprise, my pride prompted me to see it through. Now while he was preparing to draw his map in the ashes, or afterwards, I forget which, Zikali had told me that when we drew near to the great river we should come to a place on the edge of bushveld that ran down to the river, where a white man lived, adding, after casting his bones and reading from them, that he thought this white man was a trekboer. This, I should explain, means a Dutchman who has travelled away from wherever he lived and made a home for himself in the wilderness, as some wandering spirit and the desire to be free of authority often prompt these people to do. Also, after another inspection of his enchanted knucklebones, he had declared that something remarkable would happen to this man or his family, while I was visiting him. Lastly, in that map he drew in the ashes, the details of which were impressed so indelibly upon my memory, he had shown me where I should find the dwelling of this white man, of whom and of whose habitation doubtless he knew through the many spies who seemed to be at the service of all witch doctors, and more especially of Zikali, the greatest among them. Travelling by the sun and the compass I had trekked steadily in the exact direction which he indicated, to find that in this useful particular he was well named the opener of roads, since always before me I found a practicable path, although to the right or to the left there would have been none. Thus when we came to mountains, it was at a spot where we discovered a pass, when we came to swamps it was where a ridge of high ground ran between, and so forth. Also such tribes as we met upon our journey always proved of a friendly character, although perhaps the aspect of Umslopogaas and his fierce band whom, rather irreverently, I named his 12 apostles, had a share in inducing this peaceful attitude. So smooth was our progress and so well marked by water at certain intervals, that at last I came to the conclusion that we must be following some ancient road which at a forgotten period of history, had run from south to north, or vice versa. Or rather, to be honest, it was the observant Hans who made this discovery from various indications which had escaped my notice. I need not stop to detail them, but one of these was that at certain places the water holes on a high, rather barren land had been dug out, and in one or more instances, lined with stones after the fashion of an ancient well. Evidently we were following an old trade route made, perhaps, in forgotten ages when Africa was more civilized than it is now. Passing over certain high, misty lands during the third week of our trek, where frequently at this season of the year the sun never showed itself before 10 o'clock and disappeared at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and where twice we were held up for 2 whole days by dense fog, we came across a queer nomadic people who seemed to live in movable grass huts and to keep great herds of goats and long-tailed sheep. These folk ran away from us at first, but when they found that we did them no harm, became friendly and brought us offerings of milk, also of a kind of slug or caterpillar which they seemed to eat. Hans, who was a great master of different native dialects, discovered a tongue, or a mixture of tongues, in which he could make himself understood to some of them. They told him that in their day they had never seen a white man, although their fathers' fathers, an expression by which they meant their remote ancestors, had known many of them. They added, however, that if we went on steadily towards the north for another 7 days' journey, we should come to a place where a white man lived, one, they had heard, who had a long beard and killed animals with guns, as we did. Encouraged by this intelligence, we pushed forward, now traveling downhill out of the mists into a more genial country. Indeed, the veldt here was beautiful, high, rolling plains like those of the East African plateau, covered with a deep and fertile chocolate-colored soil, as we could see where the rains had washed out Dongas. The climate, too, seemed to be cool and very healthful. Altogether it was a pity to see such lands lying idle and tenanted only by countless herds of game, for there were not any native inhabitants, or at least we met none. On we trekked, our road still sloping slightly downhill, till at length we saw far away a vast sea of bushveld which, as I guessed correctly, must fringe the great Zambezi River. Moreover we, or rather Hans, whose eyes were those of a hawk, saw something else, namely buildings of a more or less civilized kind, which stood among trees by the side of a stream several miles on this side of the great belt of bush. "Look, Bars," said Hans, "those wanderers did not lie, there is the house of the white man. I wonder if he drinks anything stronger than water," he added with a sigh and a kind of reminiscent contraction of his yellow throat. As it happened, he did. Inez. We had sighted the house from far away shortly after sunrise, and by midday we were there. As we approached I saw that it stood almost immediately beneath 2 great baobab trees, barbian trees we call them in South Africa, perhaps because monkeys eat their fruit. It was a thatched house with whitewashed walls and a stoop or veranda round it, apparently of the ordinary Dutch type. Moreover, beyond it, at a little distance were other houses or rather shanties with wagon sheds, etc., and beyond and mixed up with these a number of native huts. Further on were considerable fields green with springing corn, also we saw herds of cattle grazing on the slopes. Evidently our white man was rich. Umslopogaas surveyed the place with a soldier's eye and said to me, "This must be a peaceful country, Macumazahn, where no attack is feared, since of defences I see none." "Yes," I answered, "why not, with a wilderness behind it and bushveld and a great river in front." "Men can cross rivers and travel through bushveld," he answered, and was silent. Up to this time we had seen no one, although it might have been presumed that a wagon trekking towards the house was a sufficiently unusual sight to have attracted attention. "Where can they be?" I asked. "Asleep, Bars, I think," said Hans, and as a matter of fact he was right. The whole population of the place was indulging in a noonday siesta. At last we came so near to the house that I halted the wagon and descended from the driving box in order to investigate. At this moment someone did appear, the sight of whom astonished me not a little, namely, a very striking-looking young woman. She was tall, handsome, with large dark eyes, good features, a rather pale complexion, and I think the saddest face that I ever saw. Evidently she had heard the noise of the wagon and had come out to see what caused it, for she had nothing on her head, which was covered with thick hair of a raven blackness. Catching sight of the great Umslopogaas with his gleaming axe and of his savage-looking bodyguard, she uttered an exclamation and not unnaturally turned to fly. "It's all right," I sang out, emerging from behind the oxen, and in English, though before the words had left my lips I reflected that there was not the slightest reason to suppose that she would understand them. Probably she was Dutch, or Portuguese, although by some instinct I had addressed her in English. To my surprise she answered me in the same tongue, spoken, it is true, with a peculiar accent which I could not place, as it was neither Scotch nor Irish. "Thank you," she said. "I, sir, was frightened. Your friends look," here she stumbled for a word, then added, "ferocious." I laughed at this composite adjective and answered, "Well, so they are in a way, though they will not harm you or me. But, young lady, tell me, can we outspan here? Perhaps your husband?" "I have no husband, I have only a father, sir," and she sighed. "Well, then, could I speak to your father? My name is Allan Quatermain and I am making a journey of exploration, to find out about the country beyond, you know." "Yes, I will go to wake him. He is asleep." "Everyone sleeps here at midday except me," she said with another sigh. "Why do you not follow their example?" I asked jocosely, for this young woman puzzled me and I wanted to find out about her. "Because I sleep little, sir, who think too much. There will be plenty of time to sleep soon for all of us, will there not?" I stared at her and inquired her name, because I did not know what else to say. "My name is Inez Robertson," she answered. "I will go to wake my father. Meanwhile please unyoke your oxen. They can feed with the others, they look as though they wanted rest, poor things." Then she turned and went into the house. Inez Robertson, I said to myself, that's a queer combination. English father and Portuguese mother, I suppose. But what can an Englishman be doing in a place like this? If it had been a Trekboer I should not have been surprised. Then I began to give directions about outspanning. We had just got the oxen out of the yokes, when a big, raw-boned, red-bearded, blue-eyed, roughly-clad man of about 50 years of age appeared from the house, yawning. I threw my eye over him as he advanced with a peculiar rolling gait, and formed certain conclusions. A drunkard who has once been a gentleman, I reflected to myself, for there was something peculiarly dissolute in his appearance, also one who has had to do with the sea, a diagnosis which proved very accurate. "How do you do, Mr. Allan Quatermain, which I think my daughter said is your name, unless I dreamed it, for it is one that I seem to have heard before," he exclaimed with a broad Scotch accent which I do not attempt to reproduce. "What in the name of blazes brings you here where no real white man has been for years?" "Well, I am glad enough to see you anyway, for I am sick of half-breed Portuguese and niggers, and snuff and butter girls, and gin and bad whiskey. Leave your people to attend to those oxen and come in and have a drink." "Thank you, Mr. Robertson." "Captain Robertson," he interrupted. "Man, don't look astonished. You mightn't guess it, but I commanded a mail steamer once and should like to hear myself called rightly again before I die." "I beg your pardon, Captain Robertson, but myself, I don't drink anything before sundown. However, if you have something to eat—" "Oh yes, Inez, she's my daughter, will find you a bite. Those men of yours," and he also looked doubtfully at Umslopogaas and his savage company, "will want food as well. I'll have a beast killed for them, they look as if they could eat it, horns and all. Where are my people? All asleep, I suppose, the lazy lubbers. Wait a bit, I'll wake them up." Going to the house he snatched a great sjambok cut from hippopotamus hide, from where it hung on a nail in the wall, and ran towards the group of huts which I have mentioned, roaring out the name Tomaso, also a string of oaths such as seamen use, mixed with others of a Portuguese variety. What happened there I could not see because boughs were in the way, but presently I heard blows and screams, and caught sight of people, all dark-skinned, flying from the huts. A little later a fat, half-breed man, I should say from his curling hair that his mother was a negress and his father a Portuguese, appeared with some other nondescript fellows and began to give directions in a competent fashion about our oxen, also as to the killing of a calf. He spoke in bastard Portuguese, which I could understand, and I heard him talk of Umslopogaas to whom he pointed, as that nigger, after the fashion of such cross-bred people who choose to consider themselves white men. Also he made uncomplimentary remarks about Hans, who of course understood every word he said. Evidently Tomaso's temper had been ruffled by this sudden and violent disturbance of his nap. Just then our host appeared puffing with his exertions and declaring that he had stirred up the swine with a vengeance, in proof of which he pointed to the sjambok that was reddened with blood. Captain Robertson, I said, I wish to give you a hint to be passed on to Mr. Tomaso, if that is he. He spoke of the Zulu soldier there as a nigger, etc. Well, he is a chief of a high rank and rather a terrible fellow if roused. Therefore I recommend Mr. Tomaso not to let him understand that he is insulting him. Oh. That's the way of these snuff and butters, one of whose grandmothers once met a white man, replied the captain, laughing, but I'll tell him, and he did in Portuguese. His retainer listened in silence, looking at Umslopogaas rather sulkily. Then we walked into the house. As we went the captain said, Senor Tomaso, he calls himself Senor, is my manager here and a clever man, honest too in his way and attached to me, perhaps because I saved his life once. But he has a nasty temper, as have all these crossbreeds, so I hope he won't get wrong with that native who carries a big axe. I hope so too, for his own sake, I replied emphatically. The captain led the way into the sitting room. There was but one in the house. It proved a queer kind of place with rude furniture seated with strips of hide after the Boer fashion, and yet bearing a certain air of refinement which was doubtless due to Inez, who, with the assistance of a stout native girl, was already engaged in setting the table. Thus there was a shelf with books, Shakespeare was one of these, I noticed, over which hung an ivory crucifix, which suggested that Inez was a Catholic. On the walls, too, were some good portraits, and on the window ledge a jar full of flowers. Also the forks and spoons were of silver, as were the mugs, and engraved with a tremendous coat of arms and a Portuguese motto. Presently the food appeared, which was excellent and plentiful, and the captain, his daughter, and I sat down and ate. I noted that he drank gin and water, an innocent-looking beverage but strong as he took it. It was offered to me, but like Miss Inez, I preferred coffee. During the meal and afterwards while we smoked upon the veranda, I told them as much as I thought desirable of my plans. I said that I was engaged upon a journey of exploration of the country beyond the Zambezi, and that having heard of this settlement, which, by the way, was called Strathmuir, as I gathered after a place in faraway Scotland where the captain had been born and passed his childhood, I had come here to inquire as to how to cross the great river, and about other things. The captain was interested, especially when I informed him that I was that same hunter Quatermain of whom he had heard in past years, but he told me that it would be impossible to take the wagon down into the low bushveld which we could see beneath us, as there all the oxen would die of the bite of the tsetse fly. I answered that I was aware of this and proposed to try to make an arrangement to leave it in his charge till I returned. That might be managed, Mr. Quatermain, he answered. But, man, will you ever return? They say there are queer folk living on the other side of the Zambezi, savage men who are cannibals, Haggard I think they call them. It was they who in past years cleaned out all this country, except a few river tribes who live in floating huts or on islands among the reeds, and that's why it is so empty. But this happened long ago, much before my time, and I don't suppose they will ever cross the river again. If I might ask, what brought you here, Captain? I said, for the point was one on which I felt curious. That which brings most men to wild places, Mr. Quatermain, trouble. If you want to know, I had a misfortune and piled up my ship. There were some lives lost and, rightly or wrongly, I got the sack. Then I started as a trader in a god-forsaken hole named Chind, one of the Zambezi mouths, you know, and did very well, as we Scotchmen have a way of doing. There I married a Portuguese lady, a real lady of high blood, one of the old sort. When my girl, Inez, was about 12 years old I got into more trouble, for my wife died and it pleased a certain relative of hers to say that it was because I had neglected her. This ended in a row and the truth is that I killed him in fair fight, mind you. Still, kill him I did though I scarcely knew that I had done it at the time, after which the place grew too hot to hold me. So I sold up and swore that I would have no more to do with what they are pleased to call civilization on the East Coast. During my trading I had heard that there was fine country up this way, and here I came and settled years ago, bringing my girl and Tomaso, who was one of my managers, also a few other people with me. And here I have been ever since, doing very well as before, for I trade a lot of ivory and other things and grow stuff and cattle, which I sell to the river natives. Yes, I am a rich man now and could go to live on my means in Scotland, or anywhere. Why don't you? I asked. Oh. For many reasons. I have lost touch with all that and become half wild, and I like this life and the sunshine and being my own master. Also, if I did, things might be raked up against me, about that man's death. Also, though I dare say it will make you think badly of me for it, Mr. Quatermain, I have ties down there, and he waved his hand towards the village, if so it could be called, which it wouldn't be easy for me to break. A man may be fond of his children, Mr. Quatermain, even if their skins ain't so white as they ought to be. Lastly, I have habits, you see. I am speaking out to you as man to man, which might get me into trouble again if I went back to the world, and he nodded his fine, capable-looking head in the direction of the bottle on the table. I see, I said hastily, for this kind of confession bursting out of the man's lonely heart when what he had drunk took a hold of him, was painful to hear. But how about your daughter, Miss Inez? Ah, he said, with a quiver in his voice, there you touch it. She ought to go away. There is no one for her to marry here, where we haven't seen a white man for years, and she's a lady right enough, like her mother. But who is she to go to, being a Roman Catholic whom my own door Presbyterian folk in Scotland, if any of them are left, would turn their backs on? Moreover, she loves me in her own fashion, as I love her, and she wouldn't leave me because she thinks it her duty to stay and knows that if she did, I should go to the devil altogether. Still, perhaps you might help me about her, Mr. Quatermain, that is if you live to come back from your journey, he added doubtfully. I felt inclined to ask how I could possibly help in such a matter, but thought it wisest to say nothing. This, however, he did not notice, for he went on. Now I think I will have a nap, as I do my work in the early morning, and sometimes late at night when my brain seems to clear up again, for you see I was a sailor for many years and accustomed to keeping watches. You'll look after yourself, won't you, and treat the place as your own? Then he vanished into the house to lie down. When I had finished my pipe I went for a walk. First I visited the wagon where I found Umslopogaas and his company engaged in cooking the beast that had been given them, Zulu fashion. Hans with his usual cunning had already secured a meal, probably from the servants, or from Inez herself, at least he left them and followed me. First we went down to the huts, where we saw a number of good-looking young women of mixed blood, all decently dressed and engaged about their household duties. Also we saw 4 or 5 boys and girls, to say nothing of a baby in arms, fine young people, 1 or 2 of whom were more white than colored. Those children are very like the bars with the red beard, remarked Hans reflectively. Yes, I said, and shivered, for now I understood the awfulness of this poor man's case. He was the father of a number of half-breeds who tied him to this spot as anchors tie a ship. I went on rather hastily past some sheds to a long, low building which proved to be a store. Here the quarter-blood called Tomaso, and some assistants were engaged in trading with natives from the Zambezi swamps, men of a kind that I had never seen, but in a way more civilized than many further south. What they were selling or buying, I did not stop to see, but I noticed that the store was full of goods of one sort or another, including a great deal of ivory, which, as I supposed, had come down the river from inland. Then we walked on to the cultivated fields where we saw corn growing very well, also tobacco and other crops. Beyond this were cattle kraals, and in the distance we perceived a great number of cattle and goats feeding on the slopes. This red-bearded Bars must be very rich in all things, remarked the observant Hans when we had completed our investigations. Yes, I answered, rich and yet poor. How can a man be both rich and yet poor, Bars? Asked Hans. Just at that moment some of the half-breed children whom I have mentioned, ran past us more naked than dressed and whooping like little savages. Hans contemplated them gravely, then said, I think I understand now, Bars. A man may be rich in things he loves and yet does not want, which makes him poor in other ways. Yes, I answered, as you are, Hans, when you take too much to drink. Just then we met the stately Miss Inez returning from the store, carrying some articles in a basket, soap, I think, and tea in a packet, amongst them. I told Hans to take the basket and bear it to the house for her. He went off with it and, walking slowly, we fell into conversation. Your father must do very well here, I said, nodding at the store with the crowd of natives round it. Yes, she answered, he makes much money which he puts in a bank at the coast, for living costs us nothing and there is great profit in what he buys and sells, also in the crops he grows and in the cattle. But, she added pathetically, what is the use of money in a place like this? You can get things with it, I answered vaguely. That is what my father says, but what does he get? Strong stuff to drink, dresses for those women down there, and sometimes pearls, jewels and other things for me which I do not want. I have a box full of them set in ugly gold, or loose which I cannot use, and if I put them on, who is there to see them? That clever half-breed, Tomaso, for he is clever in his way, faithful to all the women down there, no one else. You do not seem to be happy, Miss Inez. No. I cannot tell how unhappy others are, who have met none, but sometimes I think that I must be the most miserable woman in the world. Oh. No, I replied cheerfully, plenty are worse off. Then, Mr. Quatermain, it must be because they cannot feel. Did you ever have a father whom you loved? Yes, Miss Inez. He is dead, but he was a very good man, a kind of saint. Ask my servant, the little Hottentot Hans, he will tell you about him. Ah. A very good man. Well, as you may have guessed, mine is not, though there is much good in him, for he has a kind heart, and a big brain. But the drink and those women down there, they ruin him, and she wrung her hands. Why don't you go away? I blurted out. Because it is my duty to stop. That is what my religion teaches me, although of it I know little except through books, who have seen no priest for years except one who was a missionary, a Baptist, I think, who told me that my faith was false and would lead me to hell. Yes, not understanding how I lived, he said that, who did not know that hell is here. No, I cannot go, who hopes always that still God and the saints will show me how to save my father, even though it be with my blood. And now I have said too much to you who are quite a stranger. Yet, I do not know why, I feel that you will not betray me, and what is more, that you will help me if you can, since you are not one of those who drink, or, and she waved her hand towards the huts. I have my faults, Miss Inez, I answered. Yes, no doubt, else you would be a saint, not a man, and even the saints had their faults, or so I seem to remember, and became saints by repentance and conquering them. Still, I am sure that you will help me if you can. Then with a sudden flash of her dark eyes that said more than all her words, she turned and left me. Here's a pretty kettle of fish, thought I to myself as I strolled back to the wagon to see how things were going on there, and how to get the live fish out of the kettle before they boil or spoil is more than I know. I wonder why fate is always finding me such jobs to do. Even as I thought thus, a voice in my heart seemed to echo that poor girl's words, because it is your duty, and to add others to them, woe betide him who neglects his duty. I was appointed to try to hook a few fish out of the vast kettle of human woe, and therefore I must go on hooking. Meanwhile this particular problem seemed beyond me. Perhaps fate would help, I reflected. As a matter of fact, in the end fate did, if fate is the right word to use in this connection. 6. The Sea Cow Hunt. Now it had been my intention to push forward across the river at once, but here luck, or our old friend, fate, was against me. To begin with, several of Umslopogaas' men fell sick with a kind of stomach trouble, arising no doubt from something they had eaten. This, however, was not their view, or that of Umslopogaas himself. It happened that one of these men, Goroko by name, who practiced as a witch doctor in his lighter moments, naturally suspected that a spell had been cast upon them, for such people see magic in everything. Therefore he organized a smelling out at which Umslopogaas, who was as superstitious as the rest, assisted. So did Hans, although he called himself a Christian, partly out of curiosity, for he was as curious as a magpie, and partly from fear lest some implication should be brought against him in his absence. I saw the business going on from a little distance, and, unseen myself, thought it well to keep an eye upon the proceedings in case anything untoward should occur. This I did with Miss Inez, who had never witnessed anything of the sort, as a companion. The circle, a small one, was formed in the usual fashion. Goroko rigged up in the best witch doctor's costume that he could improvise. Julie came under the influence of his spirit and skipped about, waving a wildebeest's tail, and so forth. Finally, to my horror, he broke out of the ring, and running to a group of spectators from the village, switched Tomaso, who was standing among them with a lordly and contemptuous air, across the face with the news tail, shouting out that he was the wizard who had poisoned the bowels of the sick men. Thereon Tomaso, who although he could be insolent like most crossbreeds was not remarkable for courage, seeing the stir that this announcement created amongst the fierce-faced Zulus and fearing developments, promptly bolted, none attempting to follow him. After this, just as I thought that everything was over and that the time had come for me to speak a few earnest words to Umslopogaas, pointing out that matters must go no further as regards Tomaso, whom I knew that he and his people hated, Goroko went back to the circle and was seized with a new burst of inspiration. Throwing down his whisk, he lifted his arms above his head and stared at the heavens. Then he began to shout out something in a loud voice which I was too far off to catch. Whatever it may have been, evidently it frightened his hearers, as I could see from the expressions on their faces. Even Umslopogaas was alarmed, for he let his axe fall for a moment, rose as though to speak, then sat down again and covered his eyes with his hands. In a minute it was over. Goroko seemed to become normal, took some snuff and, as I guessed, after the usual fashion of these doctors, began to ask what he had been saying while the spirit possessed him, which he either had, or affected to have, forgotten. The circle, too, broke up and its members began to talk to each other in a subdued way, while Umslopogaas remained seated on the ground, brooding, and Hans slipped away in his snake-like fashion, doubtless in search of me. "What was it all about, Mr. Quatermain?" asked Inez. "Oh, a lot of nonsense," I said. "I fancy that witch doctor declared that your friend Tomaso put something into those men's food to make them sick." "I dare say that he did. It would be just like him, Mr. Quatermain, as I know that he hates them, especially Umslopogaas, of whom I am very fond. He brought me some beautiful flowers this morning which he had found somewhere, and made a long speech which I could not understand." The idea of Umslopogaas, that man of blood and iron, bringing flowers to a young lady, was so absurd that I broke out laughing, and even the sad-faced Inez smiled. Then she left me to see about something and I went to speak to Hans and asked him what had happened. "Something rather queer, I think, Bars," he answered vacuously, though I did not quite understand the last part. "The doctor, Goroko, smelt out Tomaso as the man who had made them sick, and though they will not kill him because we are guests here, those Zulus are very angry with Tomaso and I think will beat him if they get a chance. But that is only the small half of the stick," and he paused. "What is the big half, then?" I asked with irritation. "Bars, the spirit in Goroko." "The jackass in Goroko, you mean," I interrupted. "How can you, who are a Christian, talk such rubbish about spirits? I only wish that my father could hear you." "Oh. Bars, your reverend father, the predicant, is now wise enough to know all about spirits and that there are some who come into black witch doctors though they turn up their noses at white men and leave them alone. However, whatever it is that makes Goroko speak, got hold of him so that his lips said, though he remembered nothing of it afterwards, that soon this place would be red with blood, that there would be a great killing here, Bars. That is all." "Red with blood? Whose blood? What did the fool mean?" "I don't know, Bars, but what you call the jackass in Goroko, declared that those who are with the great medicine, meaning what you wear, bars, will be quite safe. So I hope that it will not be our blood, also that you will get out of this place as soon as you can. Well, I scolded Hans because he believed in what this doctor said, for I could see that he did believe it, then went to question Umslopogaas, whom I found looking quite pleased, which annoyed me still more. What is it that Goroko has been saying and why do you smile, Bulalio? I asked. Nothing much, Macumazan, except that the man who looks like tallow that has gone bad, put something in our food which made us sick, for which I would kill him were he not Redbeard's servant and that it would frighten the lady his daughter. Also he said that soon there will be fighting, which is why I smiled, who grow weary of peace. We came out to fight, did we not? Certainly not, I answered. We came out to make a quiet journey in strange lands, which is what I mean to do. Ah. Well, Macumazan, in strange lands one meets strange men with whom one does not always agree, and then in Kosakas begins to talk, and he whirled the great axe round his head, making the air whistle as it was forced through the gouge at its back. I could get no more out of him, so having extracted a promise from him that nothing should happen to Tomaso who, I pointed out, was probably quite unjustly accused, I went away. Still, the whole incident left a disagreeable impression on my mind, and I began to wish that we were safe across the Zambezi without more trouble. But we could not start at once because 2 of the Zulus were still not well enough to travel and there were many preparations to be made about the loads, and so forth, since the wagon must be left behind. Also, and this was another complication, Hans had a sore upon his foot, resulting from the prick of a poisonous thorn, and it was desirable that this should be quite healed before we marched. So it came about that I was really glad when Captain Robertson suggested that we should go down to a certain swamp formed, I gathered, by some small tributary of the Zambezi to take part in a kind of hippopotamus battue. It seemed that at this season of the year these great animals always frequented the place in numbers, also that by barring a neck of deep water through which they gained it, they, or a proportion of them, could be cut off and killed. This had been done once or twice in the past, though not of late, perhaps because Captain Robertson had lacked the energy to organize such a hunt. Now he wished to do so again, taking advantage of my presence, both because of the value of the hides of the sea cows which were cut up to be sent to the coast and sold as stambuks or whips, and because of the sport of the thing. Also I think he desired to show me that he was not altogether sunk in sloth and drink. I fell in with the idea readily enough, since in all my hunting life I had never seen anything of the sort, especially as I was told that the expedition would not take more than a week and I reckoned that the sick men and Hans would not be fit to travel sooner. So great preparations were made. The riverside natives, whose share of the spoil was to be the carcasses of the slain sea cows, were summoned by hundreds and sent off to their appointed stations to beat the swamps at a signal given by the firing of a great pile of reeds. Also many other things were done upon which I need not enter. Then came the time for us to depart to the appointed spot over 20 miles away, most of which distance it seemed we could trek in the wagon. Captain Robertson, who for the time had cut off his gin, was as active about the affair as though he were once more in command of a mail steamer. Nothing escaped his attention, indeed, in the care which he gave to details he reminded me of the captain of a great ship that is leaving port, and from it I learned how able a man he must once have been. "Does your daughter accompany us?" I asked on the night before we started. "Oh. No," he answered, "she would only be in the way. She will be quite safe here, especially as Tomaso, who is no hunter, remains in charge of the place with some of the older natives to look after the women and children." Later I saw Inez herself, who said that she would have liked to come, although she hated to see great beasts killed, but that her father was against it because he thought she might catch fever. So she supposed that she had better remain where she was. I agreed, though in my heart I was doubtful, and said that I would leave Hans, whose foot was not as yet quite well, and with whom she had made friends as she had done with Umslopogaas, to look after her. Also there would be with him the 2 great Zulus who were now recovering from their attack of stomach sickness, so that she would have nothing to fear. She answered with her slow smile that she feared nothing, still, she would have liked to come with us. Then we parted, as it proved for a long time. It was quite a ceremony. Umslopogaas, in the name of the axe, solemnly gave over Inez to the charge of his 2 followers, bidding them guard her with so much earnestness that I began to suspect he feared something which he did not choose to mention. My mind went back indeed to the prophecy of the witch Dr. Goroko, of which it was possible that he might be thinking, but as while he spoke he kept his fierce eyes fixed upon the fat and pompous quarterbreed, Tomaso, I concluded that here was the object of his doubts. It might have occurred to him that this Tomaso would take the opportunity of her father's absence to annoy Inez. If so, I was sure that he was mistaken for various reasons, of which I need only quote one, namely, that even if such an idea had ever entered his head, Tomaso was far too great a coward to translate it into action. Still, suspecting something, I also gave Hans instructions to keep a sharp eye on Inez and generally to watch the place, and if he saw anything suspicious, to communicate with us at once. Yes, Bars, said Hans, I will look after Sad Eyes, for so with their usual quickness of observation our Zulus had named Inez, as though she were my grandmother, though what there is to fear for her, I do not know. But, Bars, I would much rather come and look after you, as your reverend father, the predicant, told me to do always, which is my duty, not girl herding, Bars. Also my foot is now quite well and I want to shoot sea cows, and here he paused. And what, Hans? And Goroko said that there was going to be much fighting, and if there should be fighting and you should come to harm because I was not there to protect you, what would your reverend father think of me then? All of which meant 2 things, that Hans never liked being separated from me if he could help it, and that he much preferred a shooting trip to stopping alone in this strange place with nothing to do except eat and sleep. So I concluded, though indeed I did not get quite to the bottom of the business. In reality Hans was putting up a most gallant struggle against temptation. As I found out afterwards, Captain Robertson had been giving him strong drink on the sly, moved thereto by sympathy with a fellow toper. Also he had shown him where, if he wanted it, he could get more, and Hans always wanted gin very badly indeed. To leave it within his reach was like leaving a handful of diamonds lying about in the room of a thief. This he knew, but was ashamed to tell me the truth, and thence came much trouble. You will stop here, Hans, look after the young lady and nurse your foot, I said sternly, whereon he collapsed with a sigh and asked for some tobacco. Meanwhile Captain Robertson, who I think had been taking a stirrup cup to cheer him on the road, was making his farewells down in what was known as the village, for I saw him there kissing a collection of half-breed children, and giving Tomaso instructions to look after them and their mothers. Returning at length, he called to Inez, who remained upon the veranda, for she always seemed to shrink from her father after his visits to the village, to keep a stiff upper lip and not feel lonely, and commanded the cavalcade to start. So off we went, about 20 of the village natives, a motley crew armed with every kind of gun, marching ahead and singing songs. Then came the wagon with Captain Robertson and myself seated on the driving box, and lastly Umslopogaas and his Zulus, except the 2 who had been left behind. We trekked along a kind of native road over fine veldt of the same character as that on which Strathmuir stood, having the lower-lying bushveld which ran down to the Zambezi on our right. Before nightfall we came to a ridge whereon this bushveld turned south, fringing that tributary of the great river in the swamps of which we were to hunt for sea cows. Here we camped, and next morning, leaving the wagon in charge of my voorlooper and a couple of the Strathmuir natives, for the driver was to act as my gun-bearer, we marched down into the sea of bushveld. It proved to be full of game, but at this we dared not fire for fearing of disturbing the hippopotami in the swamps beneath, whence in that event they might escape us back to the river. About midday we passed out of the bushveld and reached the place where the drive was to be. Here, bordered by steep banks covered with bush, was swampy ground not more than 200 yards wide, down the center of which ran a narrow channel of rather deep water, draining a vast expanse of morass above. It was up this channel that the sea cows traveled to the feeding ground where they loved to collect at that season of the year. There, with the assistance of some of the riverside natives, we made our preparations under the direction of Captain Robertson. The rest of these men, to the number of several hundreds, had made a wide detour to the head of the swamps, miles away, whence they were to advance at a certain signal. These preparations were simple. A quantity of thorn trees were cut down and by means of heavy stones fastened to their trunks, anchored in the narrow channel of deep water. To their tops, which floated on the placid surface, were tied a variety of rags which we had brought with us, such as old red flannel shirts, gay-colored but worn-out blankets, and I know not what besides. Some of these fragments also were attached to the anchored ropes under water. Also we selected places for the guns upon the steep banks that I have mentioned, between which this channel ran. Foreseeing what would happen, I chose one for myself behind a particularly stout rock and, what is more, built a stone wall to the height of several feet on the landward side of it, as I guessed that the natives posted near to me would prove wild in their shooting. These labors occupied the rest of that day, and at night we retired to higher ground to sleep. Before dawn on the following morning we returned and took up our stations, some on one side of the channel and some on the other, which we had to reach in a canoe brought for the purpose by the river natives. Then, before the sun rose, Captain Robertson fired a huge pile of dried reeds and bushes, which was to give the signal to the river natives far away to begin their beat. This done, we sat down and waited, after making sure that every gun had plenty of ammunition ready. As the dawn broke, by climbing a tree near my chance or shelter, I saw a good many miles away to the south a wide circle of little fires, and guessed that the natives were beginning to burn the dry reeds of the swamp. Presently these fires drew together into a thin wall of flame. Then I knew that it was time to return to the chance and prepare. It was full daylight, however, before anything happened. Watching the still channel of water, I saw ripples on it and bubbles of air rising. Suddenly there appeared the head of a great bull hippopotamus which, having caught sight of our rag barricade, either above or below water, had risen to the surface to see what it might be. I put a bullet from an 8-bore rifle through its brain, whereon it sank, as I guessed, stone dead to the bottom of the channel, thus helping to increase the barricade by the bulk of its great body. Also it had another effect. I have observed that sea cows cannot bear the smell and taint of blood, which frightens them horribly, so that they will expose themselves to almost any risk, rather than get it into their nostrils. Now, in this still water where there was no perceptible current, the blood from the dead bull soon spread all about, so that when the herd, following their leader, began to arrive they were much alarmed. Indeed, the first of them, on winding or tasting it, turned and tried to get back up the channel where, however, they met others following, and there ensued a tremendous confusion. They rose to the surface, blowing, snorting, bellowing and scrambling over each other in the water, while continually more and more arrived behind them, till there was a perfect pandemonium in that narrow place. All our guns opened fire wildly upon the mass. It was like a battle, and through the smoke I caught sight of the riverside natives who were acting as beaters, advancing far away, fantastically dressed, screaming with excitement and waving spears, or sometimes torches of flaming reeds. Most of these were scrambling along the banks, but some of the bolder spirits advanced over the lagoon in canoes, driving the hippopotami towards the mouth of the channel by which alone they could escape into the great swamps below and so on to the river. In all my hunting experience I do not think I ever saw a more remarkable scene. Still, in a way, to me it was unpleasant, for I flatter myself that I am a sportsman and a battle of this sort is not sport as I understand the term. At length it came to this: the channel for quite a long way was literally full of hippopotami. I should think there must have been 100 of them or more, of all sorts and sizes, from great bulls down to little calves. Some of these were killed, not many, for the shooting of our gallant company was execrable and almost at hazard. Also for every sea cow that died, of which number I think that Captain Robertson and myself accounted for most, many were only wounded. Still, the unhappy beasts, crazed with noise and fire and blood, did not seem to dare to face our frail barricade, probably for the reason that I have given. For a while they remained massed together in the water, or under it, making a most horrible noise. Then of a sudden they seemed to take a resolution. A few of them broke back towards the burning reeds, the screaming beaters and the advancing canoes. One of these, indeed, a wounded bull, charged a canoe, crushed it in its huge jaws and killed the rower. How exactly I do not know, for his body was never found. The majority of them, however, took another counsel, for emerging from the water on either side, they began to scramble towards us along the steep banks, or even to climb up them with surprising agility. It was at this point in the proceedings that I congratulated myself earnestly upon the solid character of the water-worn rock which I had selected as a shelter. Behind this rock, together with my gun-bearer and Umslopogaas, who, as he did not shoot, had elected to be my companion, I crouched and banged away at the unwieldy creatures as they advanced. But fire fast as I might with 2 rifles, I could not stop the half of them, they were drawing unpleasantly near. I glanced at Umslopogaas and even then was amused to see that probably for the first time in his life that redoubtable warrior was in a genuine fright. "This is madness, Macumazahn," he shouted above the din. "Are we to stop here and be stamped flat by a horde of water pigs?" "It seems so," I answered, "unless you prefer to be stamped flat outside or eaten," I added, pointing to a great crocodile that had also emerged from the channel and was coming along towards us with open jaws. "By the axe," shouted Umslopogaas again, "I, a warrior, will not die thus, trodden on like a slug by an ox." Now I have mentioned a tree which I climbed. In his extremity Umslopogaas rushed for that tree and went up it like a lamplighter, just as the crocodile wriggled past its trunk, snapping at his retreating legs. After this I took no more note of him, partly because of the advancing sea cows, and more for the reason that one of the village natives posted above me, firing wildly, put a large round bullet through the sleeve of my coat. Indeed, had it not been for the wall which I built that protected us, I am certain that both my bearer and I would have been killed, for afterwards I found it splashed over with lead from bullets which had struck the stones. Well, thanks to the strength of my rock and to the wall, or as Hans said afterwards, to Zikali's great medicine, we escaped unhurt. The rush went by me, indeed. I killed one sea cow so close that the powder from the rifle actually burned its hide. But it did go by, leaving us untouched. All, however, were not so fortunate, since of the village natives 2 were trampled to death, while a third had his leg broken. Also, and this was really amusing, a bewildered bull charging at full speed, crashed into the trunk of Umslopogaas' tree, and as it was not very thick, snapped it in 2. Down came the top, in which the dignified chief was ensconced like a bird in a nest, though at that moment there was precious little dignity about him. However, except for scratches he was not hurt, as the hippopotamus had other business in urgent need of attention and did not stop to settle with him. "Such are the things which happen to a man who mixes himself up with matters of which he knows nothing," said Umslopogaas sententiously to me afterwards. But all the same he could never bear any allusion to this tree-climbing episode in his martial career, which, as it happened, had taken place in full view of his retainers, among whom it remained the greatest of jokes. Indeed, he wanted to kill a man, the wag of the party, who gave him a slang name which, being translated, means he who is so brave that he dares to ride a waterhorse up a tree. It was all over at last, for which I thanked Providence devoutly. A good many of the sea cows were dead. I think 21 was our exact bag, but the majority of them had escaped in one way or another, many, as I fear, wounded. I imagine that at the last the bulk of the herd overcame its fears and, swimming through our screen, passed away down the channel. At any rate they were gone, and having ascertained that there was nothing to be done for the man who had been trampled on my side of the channel, I crossed it in the canoe with the object of returning quietly to our camp to rest. But as yet there was to be no quiet for me, for there I found Captain Robertson, who I think had been refreshing himself out of a bottle and was in a great state of excitement about a native who had been killed near him who was a favourite of his, and another whose leg was broken. He declared vehemently that the hippopotamus which had done this had been wounded and rushed into some bushes a few hundred yards away, and that he meant to take vengeance upon it. Indeed, he was just setting off to do so. Seeing his agitated state, I thought it wisest to follow him. What happened need not be set out in detail. It is sufficient to say that he found that hippopotamus and blazed both barrels at it in the bushes, hitting it, but not seriously. Out lumbered the creature with its mouth open, wishing to escape. Robertson turned to fly as he was in its path, but from one cause or another, tripped and fell down. Certainly he would have been crushed beneath its huge feet had I not stepped in front of him and sent 2 solid 8-ball bullets down that yawning throat, killing it dead within 3 feet of where Robertson was trying to rise, and I may add, of myself. This narrow escape sobered him, and I am bound to say that his gratitude was profuse. "You are a brave man," he said, "and had it not been for you by now I should be wherever bad people go. I'll not forget it, Mr. Quatermain, and if ever you want anything that John Robertson can give, why, it's yours." "Very well," I answered, being seized by an inspiration, "I do want something that you can give easily enough. Give it a name and it's yours, half my place, if you like." I went on as I slipped new cartridges into the rifle, "I want you to promise to give up drink for your daughter's sake. That's what nearly did for you just now, you know." "Man, you ask a hard thing," he said slowly. "But by God I'll try for her sake and for yours too." Then I went to help to set the leg of the injured man, which was all the rest I got that morning. 7. The Oath. We spent 3 more days at that place. First it was necessary to allow time to elapse before the gases which generated in their great bodies caused those of the sea cows which had been killed in the water, to float. Then they must be skinned and their thick hides cut into strips and pieces to be traded for stambuks or to make small native shields for which some of the East Coast tribes will pay heavily. All this took a long while, during which I amused, or disgusted myself in watching those river natives devouring the flesh of the beasts. The lean, what there was of it, they dried and smoked into a kind of biltong, but a great deal of the fat they ate at once. I had the curiosity to weigh a lump which was given to one thin, hungry-looking fellow. It scaled quite 20 pounds. Within 4 hours he had eaten it to the last ounce and lay there, a distended and torpid log. What would not we white people give for such a digestion? At last all was over and we started homewards, the man with a broken leg being carried in a kind of litter. On the edge of the bushveld we found the wagon quite safe, also one of Captain Robertson's that had followed us from Strathmuir in order to carry the expected load of hippopotamus hides and ivory. I asked my voorlooper if anything had happened during our absence. He answered nothing, but on the previous evening after dark, he had seen a glow in the direction of Strathmuir which lay on somewhat lower ground about 20 miles away, as though numerous fires had been lighted there. It struck him so much, he added, that he climbed a tree to observe it better. He did not think, however, that any building had been burned there, as the glow was not strong enough for that. I suggested that it was caused by some grass fire or reed burning, to which he replied indifferently that he did not think so as the line of the glow was not sufficiently continuous. There the matter ended, though I confess that the story made me anxious, for what exact reason I could not say. Umslopogaas also, who had listened to it, for our talk was in Zulu, looked grave, but made no remark. But as since his tree-climbing experience he had been singularly silent, of this I thought little. We had trekked at a time which we calculated would bring us to Strathmuir about an hour before sundown, allowing for a short halt halfway. As my oxen were got in more quickly than those of the other wagon after this outspan, I was the first away, followed at a little distance by Umslopogaas, who preferred to walk with his Zulus. The truth was that I could not get that story about the glow of fires out of my mind and was anxious to push on, which had caused me to hurry up the inspanning. Perhaps we had covered a couple of miles of the 10 or 12 which still lay between us and Strathmuir, when far off on the crest of one of the waves of the veldt which much resembled those of the swelling sea frozen while in motion, I saw a small figure approaching us at a rapid trot. Somehow that figure suggested hands to my mind, so much so that I fetched my glasses to examine it more closely. A short scrutiny through them convinced me that Hans it was, Hans and no other, advancing at a great pace. Filled with uneasiness, I ordered the driver to flog up the oxen, with the result that in a little over 5 minutes we met. Halting the wagon, I leapt from the wagon box and calling to Umslopogaas who had kept up with us at a slow, swinging trot, went to Hans, who, when he saw me, stood still at a little distance, swinging his apology for a hat in his hand, as was his fashion when ashamed or perplexed. "What is the matter, Hans?" I asked when we were within speaking distance. "Oh, bars, everything," he answered, and I noticed that he kept his eyes fixed upon the ground and that his lips twitched. "Speak, you fool," and in Zulu, I said, for by now Umslopogaas had joined me. "Bars," he answered in that tongue, "a terrible thing has come about at the farm of Redbeard yonder. Yesterday afternoon at the time when people are in the habit of sleeping there till the sun grows less hot, a body of great men with fierce faces who carried big spears, perhaps there were 50 of them, bars, crept up to the place through the long grass and growing crops, and attacked it." "Did you see them come?" I asked. "No, bars. I was watching at a little distance as you bade me do, and the sun being hot, I shut my eyes to keep out the glare of it, so that I did not see them until they had passed me and heard the noise." "You mean that you were asleep or drunk, Hans, but go on." "Bars, I do not know," he answered shamefacedly, "but after that I climbed a tall tree with a kind of bush at the top of it. I ascertained afterwards that this was a sort of leaf-crowned palm, and from it I saw everything without being seen." "What did you see, Hans?" I asked him. "I saw the big men run up and make a kind of circle round the village. Then they shouted, and the people in the village came out to see what was the matter. Tomaso and some of the men caught sight of them first and ran away fast into the hillside at the back where the trees grow, before the circle was complete. Then the women and the children came out and the big men killed them with their spears, all. "Good God!" I exclaimed. "And what happened at the house and to the lady?" "Bars, some of the men had surrounded that also, and when she heard the noise the lady Sad Eyes came out onto the stoop, and with her came the 2 Zulus of the axe who had been left sick but were now quite recovered. A number of the big men ran as though to take her, but the 2 Zulus made a great fight in front of the little steps to the stoop, having their backs protected by the stoop, and killed 6 of them before they themselves were killed. Also Sad Eyes shot one with a pistol she carried, and wounded another so that the spear fell out of his hand. Then the rest fell on her and tied her up, setting her in a chair on the stoop where 2 remained to watch her. They did her no hurt, bars, indeed, they seemed to treat her as gently as they could. Also they went into the house and there they caught that tall fat yellow girl who always smiles and is called Janae, she who waits upon the lady Sad Eyes, and brought her out to her. I think they told her, bars, that she must look after her mistress and that if she tried to run away she would be killed, for afterwards I saw Janae bring her food and other things." "And then, Hans?" "Then, bars, most of the great men rested a while, though some of them went through the store gathering such things as they liked, blankets, knives and iron cooking pots, but they set fire to nothing, nor did they try to catch the cattle. Also they took dry wood from the pile and lit big fires, 8 or 9 of them, and when the sun set they began to feast." "What did they feast on, Hans, if they took no cattle?" I asked with a shiver, for I was afraid of I knew not what. "Bars," answered Hans, turning his head away and looking at the ground, "they feasted on the children whom they had killed, also on some of the young women. These tall soldiers are men-eaters, bars." At this horrible intelligence I turned faint and felt as though I was going to fall, but recovering myself, signed to him to go on with his story. "They feasted quite nicely, bars," he continued, making no noise. "Then some of them slept while others watched, and that went on all night. As soon as it was dark, but before the moon rose, I slid down the tree and crept round to the back of the house without being seen or heard, as I can, bars. I got into the house by the back door and crawled to the window of the sitting room. It was open, and peeping through I saw Sad Eyes still tied to the seat on the stoop not more than a pace away, while the girl Janae crouched on the floor at her feet. I think she was asleep or fainting. I made a little noise, like a night adder hissing, and kept on making it, till at last Sad Eyes turned her head. Then I spoke in a very low whisper, for fear lest I should wake the two guards who were dozing on either side of her wrapped in their blankets, saying, "It is I, Hans, come to help you." "You cannot," she answered, also speaking very low. "Get to your master and tell him and my father to follow. These men are called Haggard and live far away across the river. They are going to take me to their home, as I understand, to rule them, because they want a white woman to be a queen over them who have always been ruled by a certain white queen, against whom they have rebelled. I do not think they mean to do me any harm, unless perhaps they want to marry me to their chief, but of this I am not sure from their talk, which I understand badly. Now go, before they catch you." "I think you might get away," I whispered back. "I will cut your bonds. When you are free, slip through the window and I will guide you." "Very well, try it," she said. So I drew my knife and stretched out my arm. But then, bars, I showed myself a fool. If the great medicine had still been there I might have known better. I forgot the starlight which shone upon the blade of the knife. That girl Janae came out of her sleep or swoon, lifted her head and saw the knife. She screamed once, then at a word from her mistress was silent. But it was enough, for it woke up the guards who glared about them and threatened Janae with their great spears. Also they went to sleep no more, but began to talk together, though what they said I could not hear, for I was hiding on the floor of the room. After this, knowing that I could do no good and might do harm and get myself killed, I crept out of the house as I had crept in, and crawled back to my tree. "Why did you not come to me?" I asked. "Because I still hoped I might be able to help Sad Eyes, bars. Also I wanted to see what happened, and I knew that I could not bring you here in time to be any good. Yet it is true I thought of coming though I did not know the road." "Perhaps you were right." "At the first dawn," continued Hans, "the great men who are called Haggard rose and ate what was left over from the night before. Then they gathered themselves together and went to the house. Here they found a large chair, that seated with rimpis in which the bar's Redbeard sits, and lashed 2 poles to the chair. Beneath the chair they tied the garments and other things of the lady Sad Eyes which they made Janae gather as Sad Eyes directed her. This done, very gently they sat Sad Eyes herself in the chair, bowing while they made her fast. After this 8 of them set the poles upon their shoulders, and they all went away at a trot, heading for the bushveld, driving with them a herd of goats which they had stolen from the farm, and making Janae run by the chair. I saw everything, bars, for they passed just beneath my tree. Then I came to seek you, following the outward spoor of the wagons which I could not have done well at night. That is all, bars." "Hans," I said, "you have been drinking and because of it the lady Sad Eyes is taken a prisoner by cannibals, for had you been awake and watching, you might have seen them coming and saved her and the rest. Still, afterwards you did well, and for the rest you must answer to heaven. I must tell your reverend father, the predicant, bars, that the white master, Redbeard, gave me the liquor and it is rude not to do as a great white master does, and drink it up." "I am sure he will understand, bars," said Hans abjectly. I thought to myself that it was true and that the spear which Robertson cast had fallen upon his own head, as the Zulus say, but I made no answer, lacking time for argument. "Did you say," asked Umslopogaas, speaking for the first time, "that my servants killed only 6 of these men-eaters?" Hans nodded and answered, "Yes, 6. I counted the bodies." "It was ill done, they should have killed 6 each," said Umslopogaas moodily. "Well, they have left the more for us to finish," and he fingered the great axe. Just then Captain Robertson arrived in his wagon, calling out anxiously to know what was the matter, for some premonition of evil seemed to have struck him. My heart sank at the sight of him, for how was I to tell such a story to the father of the murdered children and of the abducted girl? In the end I felt that I could not. Yes, I turned coward and saying that I must fetch something out of the wagon, bolted into it, bidding Hans go forward and repeat his tale. He obeyed unwillingly enough, and looking out between the curtains of the wagon tent I saw all that happened, though I could not hear the words that passed. Robertson had halted the oxen and jumping from the wagon box strode forward and met Hans, who began to speak with him, twitching his hat in his hands. Gradually as the tale progressed, I saw the captain's face freeze into a mask of horror. Then he began to argue and deny, then to weep. Oh! It was a terrible sight to see that great man weeping over those whom he had lost, and in such a fashion. After this a kind of blind rage seized him, and I thought he was going to kill Hans, who was of the same opinion, for he ran away. Next he staggered about, shaking his fists, cursing and shouting, till presently he fell of a heap and lay face downwards, beating his head against the ground and groaning. Now I went to him because I must. He saw me coming and sat up. "That's a pretty story, Quatermain, which this little yellow monkey has been gibbering at me. Man, do you understand what he says? He says that all those half-blood children of mine are dead, murdered by savages from over the Zambezi, yes, and eaten, too, with their mothers. Do you take the point? Eaten like lambs. Those fires your man saw last night were the fires on which they were cooked, my little so-and-so and so-and-so, and he mentioned half a dozen different names. Yes, cooked, Quatermain. And that isn't all of it, they have taken Inez too. They didn't eat her, but they have dragged her off a captive for God knows what reason. I couldn't understand. The whole ship's crew is gone, except the captain absent on leave and the first officer, Tomaso, who deserted with some Lascar stokers, and left the women and children to their fate. My God, I'm going mad. I'm going mad. If you have any mercy in you, give me something to drink." "All right," I said, "I will. Sit here and wait a minute." Then I went to the wagon and poured out a stiff tot of spirits, into which I put an amazing dose of bromide from a little medicine chest I always carry with me, and 30 drops of chlorodyne on the top of it. All this compound I mixed up with a little water and took it to him in a tin cup so that he could not see the color. He drank it at a gulp and, throwing the pannikin aside, sat down on the veldt, groaning while the company watched him at a respectful distance, for Hans had joined the others and his tail had spread like fire in drought-parched grass. In a few minutes the drugs began to take effect upon Robertson's tortured nerves, for he rose and said quietly, "What now?" "Vengeance, or rather justice," I answered. "Yes," he exclaimed, "vengeance. I swear that I will be avenged, or die or both." Again I saw my opportunity and said, "You must swear more than that, Robertson. Only sober men can accomplish great things, for drink destroys the judgment. If you wish to be avenged for the dead and to rescue the living, you must be sober, or I for one will not help you." "Will you help me if I do, to the end, good or ill, Quatermain?" he added. I nodded. "That's as much as another's oath," he muttered. "Still, I will put my thought in words. I swear by God, by my mother, like these natives, and by my daughter born in honest marriage, that I will never touch another drop of strong drink, until I have avenged those poor women and their little children, and rescued Inez from their murderers. If I do, you may put a bullet through me." "That's all right," I said in an offhand fashion, though inwardly I glowed with pride at the success of my great idea, for at the time I thought it great, and went on. "Now let us get to business. The first thing to do is to trek to Strathmuir and make preparations, the next to start upon the trail. Come to sit on the wagon with me and tell me what guns and ammunition you have got, for according to Hans those savages don't seem to have touched anything, except a few blankets and a herd of goats." He did as I asked, telling me all he could remember. Then he said, "It is a strange thing, but now I recall that about 2 years ago a great savage with a high nose, who talked a sort of Arabic which, like Inez, I understand, having lived on the coast, turned up one day and said he wanted to trade. I asked him what in, and he answered that he would like to buy some children. I told him that I was not a slave dealer. Then he looked at Inez, who was moving about, and said that he would like to buy her to be a wife for his chief, and offered some fabulous sum in ivory and in gold, which he said should be paid before she was taken away. I snatched his big spear from his hand, broke it over his head and gave him the best hiding with its shaft that he had ever heard of. Then I kicked him off the place. He limped away, but when he was out of reach, turned and called out that one day he would come again with others and take her, meaning Inez, without leaving the price in ivory and gold. I ran for my gun, but when I got back he had gone and I never thought of the matter again from that day to this. Well, he kept his promise, I said, but Robertson made no answer, for by this time that thundering dose of bromide and laudanum had taken effect on him and he had fallen asleep, of which I was glad, for I thought that this sleep would save his sanity, as I believe it did for a while. We reached Strathmuir towards sunset, too late to think of attempting the pursuit that day. Indeed, during our trek, I had thought the matter out carefully and come to the conclusion that to try to do so would be useless. We must rest and make preparations. Also, there was no hope of our overtaking these brutes who already had a clear 12-hour start, by a sudden spurt. They must be run down patiently by following their spoor, if indeed they could be run down at all before they vanished into the vast recesses of unknown Africa. The most we could do this night was to get ready. Captain Robertson was still sleeping when we passed the village, and of this I was heartily glad, since the remains of a cannibal feast are not pleasant to behold, especially when they are. Indeed, of these I determined to be rid at once, so slipping off the wagon with Hans and some of the farm boys, for none of the Zulus would defile themselves by touching such human remnants, I made up 2 of the smouldering fires, the light of which the Vorlupa had seen upon the sky, and onto them cast, or caused to be cast, those poor fragments. Also I told the farm natives to dig a big grave and in it to place the other bodies and generally to remove the traces of murder. Then I went on to the house, and not too soon. Seeing the wagons arrive and having made sure that the Amahagger were gone, Tommaso and the other cowards emerged from their hiding places and returned. Unfortunately for the former, the first person he met was Umslopogaas, who began to revile the fat half-breed in no measured terms, calling him dog, coward, and other opprobrious names, such as deserter of women and children, and so forth, all of which someone translated. Tommaso, an insolent person, tried to swagger the matter out, saying that he had gone to get assistance. Infuriated at this lie, Umslopogaas leapt upon him with a roar, and though he was a strong man, dealt with him as a lion does with a buck. Lifting him from his feet, he hurled him to the ground, then as he strove to rise and run, caught him again and, as it seemed to me, was about to break his back across his knee. Just at this juncture I arrived. "Let the man go," I shouted to him. "Is there not enough death here already?" "Yes," answered Umslopogaas, "I think there is. Best that this jackal should live to eat his own shame," and he cast Tommaso to the ground, where he lay groaning. Robertson, who was still asleep in the wagon, woke up at the noise, and descended from it, looking dazed. I got him to the house and in doing so made my way past, or rather between the bodies of the 2 Zulus and of the 6 men whom they had killed, also of him whom Inez had shot. Those Zulus had made a splendid fight, for they were covered with wounds, all of them in front, as I found upon examination. Having made Robertson lie down upon his bed, I took a good look at the slain Amahagger. They were magnificent men, all of them, tall, spare and shapely, with very clear-cut features and rather frizzled hair. From these characteristics, as well as the lightness of their color, I concluded that they were of a Semitic or Arab type, and that the admixture of their blood with that of the Bantus was but slight, if indeed there were any at all. Their spears, of which one had been cut through by a blow of a Zulu's axe, were long and broad, not unlike to those used by the Maasai, but of finer workmanship. By this time the sun was setting, and thoroughly tired by all that I had gone through, I went into the house to get something to eat, having told Hans to find food and prepare a meal. As I sat down, Robertson joined me and I made him also eat. His first impulse was to go to the cupboard and fetch the spirit bottle. Indeed, he rose to do so. "Hans is making coffee," I said warningly. "Thank you," he answered, "I forgot. Force of habit, you know." Here I may state that never from that moment did I see him touch another drop of liquor, not even when I drank my modest tot in front of him. His triumph over temptation was splendid and complete, especially as the absence of his accustomed potations made him ill for some time and of course depressed his spirits, with painful results that were apparent in due course. In fact, the man became totally changed. He grew gloomy but resourceful, also full of patience. Only one idea obsessed him: to rescue his daughter and avenge the murder of his people. Indeed, except his sins, he thought of and found interest in nothing else. Moreover, his iron constitution cast off all the effects of his past debauchery, and he grew so strong that although I was pretty tough in those days, he could out-tire me. To return, I engaged him in conversation and with his help made a list of what we should require on our vendetta journey, all of which served to occupy his mind. Then I sent him to bed, saying that I would call him before dawn, having first put a little more bromide into his third cup of coffee. After this I turned in, and notwithstanding the sight of those remains of the cannibal feast and the knowledge of the dead men who lay outside my window, I slept like a top. Indeed, it was the captain who awakened me, not I the captain, saying that daylight was on the break and we had better be stirring. So we went down to the store, where I was thankful to find that everything had been tidied up in accordance with my directions. On our way, Robertson asked me what had become of the remains, whereon I pointed to the smouldering ashes of one of the great fires. He went to it and kneeling down, said a prayer in broad Scotch, doubtless one that he had learned at his mother's knee. Then he took some of the ashes from the edge of the pyre, for such it was, and threw them into the glowing embers where, as he knew, lay all that was left of those who had sprung from him. Also he tossed others of them into the air, though what he meant by this I did not understand and never asked. Probably it was some rite indicative of expiation or of revenge, or both, which he had learned from the savages among whom he had lived so long. After this we went into the store and with the help of some of the natives, or half-breeds, who had accompanied us on the sea cow expedition, selected all the goods we wanted, which we sent to the house. As we returned thither I saw Umslopogaas and his men engaged, with the usual Zulu ceremonies, in burying their two companions in a hole they had made in the hillside. I noted, however, that they did not inter their war axes or their throwing spears with them as usual, probably because they thought that these might be needed. In place of them they put with the dead little models roughly shaped of bits of wood, which models they killed by first breaking them across. I lingered to watch the funeral and heard Goroko, the witch doctor, make a little speech. "O Father and Chief of the Axe," he said, addressing Umslopogaas, who stood silent leaning on his weapon and watching all, a portentous figure in the morning mist. "O Father, O Son of the Heavens," this was an allusion to the royal blood of Umslopogaas, of which the secret was well known, although it would never have been spoken aloud in Zululand. "O Slaughterer, Bulalio, O Woodpecker who picks at the hearts of men, O Kingslayer, O Conqueror of the Halakazi, O Victor in 100 fights, O Gatherer of the lily-bloom that faded in the hand, O Wolfman, Captain of the wolves that ravened, O Slayer of Faku, O Great One whom it pleases to seem small, because he must follow his blood to the end appointed." This was the opening of the speech, the bongoing or giving of titles of praise to the person addressed, of which I have quoted but a sample, for there were many more of them that I have forgotten. Then the speaker went on. "It was told to me, though of it I remember nothing, that when my spirit was in me a while ago I prophesied that this place would flow with blood, and lo! The blood has flowed, and with it that of these our brothers," and he gave the names of the two dead Zulus, also those of their forefathers for several generations. "It seems, Father, that they died well, as you would have wished them to die, and as doubtless they desired to die themselves, leaving a tail behind them, though it is true that they might have died better, killing more of the men-eaters, as it is certain they would have done, had they not been sick inside. They are finished, they have gone beyond to await us in the underworld among the ghosts. Their story is told, and soon to their children they will be but names whispered in honor after the sun has set. Enough of them who have showed us how to die as our fathers did before them. Baroko paused a while, then added with a waving of his hands. My spirit comes to me again, and I know that these our brothers shall not pass unavenged. Chief of the Axe, great glory awaits the axe, for it shall feed full. I have spoken. Good words, grunted Umslopogaas. Then he saluted the dead by raising Inkosakas and came to me to consult about our journey.